Guns, Martinis, Gadgets, and Guns. The Fantasmagorium show is proud to present. 70 years ago today, the world was changed by one man. Ian Fleming had the debut adventure of what would become the most well-known of secret agents. While Fleming's legacy is best known from the film adaptations, it was the books that started it all. With legal entanglements preventing Rajak and Eon from bringing the story to the big screen until 2006, the adaptation is one of the truest of the entire series. Straddling 2 centuries and 2 millennia, the greatest spy in the history of cinema and literature, we celebrate James Bond. My name is Scotty R37. My opposite number Cat is here, and Steve is the money. Every penny of it. How are you doing, Cat?
Good.
That is excellent. Before we get into anything else, do we have any news? Any Bond news?
Not that I'm aware of.
Me either. The last time I heard it, it was going to be a long time before they finally decided on who they were casting for the next James Bond.
I think she said early. I think Barbara said the earliest that they could get started filming would be next year.
Okay, so it is coming.
Yeah.
But this is am I mistaken in thinking that this is the longest gap between Bond movies?
Between what?
Between the releases of 2 Bond movies, even like, longer.
You mean Die Another Day to Casino Royale?
No, from No Time to Die to whatever comes next. Terms of okay.
If they stick to that was released October 2021. If they stick to the 2024 schedule, that could be late 2024 or sometime spring 2025. So that would be less than 4 years. That would be 3 to 3.5 years. Or 4 years if it's fall 2025. Longest was 5 years, 11 months for going from Spectre to No Time to Die. And that's the longest.
You have it down to the
about the longest, I think.
Okay.
Let's see. License to Kill, was that summer '89?
Yes.
Okay, never mind. Then that was the longest because that was 6.5 years. Because summer to fall, November '95 for License to Kill and Goldeneye. So.
Well, and maybe it's just me getting antsy because. With so many other properties, so many other intellectual properties being released like a machine gun unloading.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I enjoy my event cinema, and James Bond is certainly that. But the problem with enjoying the event cinema is the lulls in between. Now, and before we get into the show proper, I do have to acknowledge, and if anyone would like to see why, we are reviewing Casino Royale today. Again, if you go to the playlist for Martinis, Gadgets, and Guns, you can find our original review for Casino Royale. I should probably watch it because I have no recollection of it whatsoever. Kat has very graciously asked me to re-review a little bit more coherently and with less swears. To discuss this, and also fortuitously, it is the 70th anniversary of the publishing of Casino Royale. You've got it there. Delightful.
Yes, I just read this book just a few days ago, actually, on Monday.
Sorry.
What were you going to say?
I was going to say I originally read it when Casino Royale came out, so I haven't read it since 2006.
This was my first time reading it.
Okay. So I'm glad that it's fresh in your mind. When I first saw Casino Royale, fresh off of reading the book, I was under the impression that this is more than likely one of the truest adaptations of any novel to film.
Not exactly. And not
okay.
For this movie, no. If you're comparing it for the 2006 movie to the book, then no, definitely not. There's a lot of changes. Primarily, the whole book takes place in Somme, where at the Hotel Splendide in the casino. They don't go anywhere else around the world before or whatever. It's like you start with a little prelude introducing James Bond at the hotel and the casino, and then the second chapter is just a dossier on Le Chiffre giving his whole history and the whole because it's the time period 1950s. He had embezzled some money from the French Communist Party to invest in a bunch of brothels and trying to make business money on the side. But then with the passage of the new law barring all of that, no way he was going to recoup the money, and he needed to recoup the money and replace it before they knew he had taken it, which wouldn't have been an issue had the law not been passed. And so he sets up this poker game at Somme at the Royale Casino to recoup the money, and it's a quick read. It's only like 150 pages or so. But Bond meets Mathis, and he meets Felix through Mathis, and you got Vesper there. But the whole ending it does drag a bit, because it's not that Vesper's hanging around with him because she wants to, steal the money or hand it over to him or whatever. Like, she didn't make you had this in the book. The reason the shooter, who was a Smersh assassin who found out that Le Chiffre stole the money rather than Mr. White, the reason the Smersh assassin lets him go is because he didn't have any orders to kill Bond. He just accepted that the money's already gone. Bond got it. He deposited it with the Treasury. There's nothing he could do about it. And instead of killing Bond, he carves the Cyrillic letter S into his hand, meaning a spy. So that way anybody can recognize him as a spy later on, and he leaves. And he even anticipates that I'll probably catch hell for not killing you later, but what the hell? I don't have orders for it, so I'm just going to do this. And Vesper was basically hoping that they would be able to start a new life together. And then when she saw Gettler, she kind of got scared of that. And the book sort of ends a bit anticlimactically, where Bond knows that she's gotten on the phone with Gettler and talked about something, but he's not sure what. He's trying to figure it out and kind of giving her time to kind of suss this out of her. And then one morning he finds that one of the hotel employees runs in, because they're staying at like a guest cottage down near the beach. And he's like, "Oh, sir, there's been a terrible accident." And he runs in there and finds that she's committed suicide from overdosing on pills, and left a note saying that she fell in love and was afraid that, they would try and get to him, that she wanted to start a new life. It's not going to work. And Bond's very bitter about that. And when he contacts back home to say that he's not going to retire after all, he's like, "No, she was a double agent, blah, blah, blah." And he says, and you don't hear the other half of the conversation, but he's like, "Yes, I said was. The bitch is dead now." And that's how the book ends. But again, it's all in Somme and then the other parts of south of France. And all that stuff on Le Chiffre's backstory in terms of why he was doing it was just in the dossier in the second chapter. So it's very similar to the 1954 Casino Royale with Peter Lorre, actually, because they give you it's very much everything's at the casino right there. The only other difference is that the torture scene takes place at a house that Le Chiffre is renting down the way, and they still have the car chase, but it doesn't end with Vesper being put out in the street. It ends up with other cars kind of veering around Bond, trick that caused him to flip. But so in that respect, it's much more similar to the 1954 version. But the Casino Royale, obviously, for the 2006 movie, has to be updated for modern politics as well as, modern sensibilities for what fans expect. Like, they expect it to be a jet-setting story. You're going to go to multiple places. You want more action. So they came up with the whole Skyfleet thing, and I think it actually makes for a more enjoyable film. Because the book was admittedly a bit of a dry read, especially going into the third act, where he's just with Vesper at the cottage, and it just goes on and on. And it's like a little bit like in You Only Live Twice, where you could tell that Fleming wanted to end the story with him like proposing marriage, and they're going to stay there, and then it just sort of goes on for so long until it suddenly changes, and my memory's back, and blah, blah, blah. Because that was the publisher and the editor getting in his ear. "You crazy? You can't cancel this," or end this. But Casino Royale, it just kind of goes on, and it's like, yeah, it doesn't, because there's no triumphant ending where Bond gets to confront Mr. White at the Italian villa and shoot him in the ankle and be like, "I'm Bond." You don't have that here. So you do see how he's very much a naive rookie. Like, there's an incident where no sooner than he arrives, his cover gets blown by these two people in an adjacent room who've been spying on him, and these two Bulgarian hitmen come to kill him with a suitcase bomb out in the street. And then they intended to use the second suitcase bomb that supposedly was a smoke bomb to cover their escape, like as if we're in a cartoon. Of course, they were double-crossed by Le Chiffre, and the second suitcase bomb was just another bomb, and they both blew up. But it was still pretty brutal, and Bond taking into account that, "Oh, geez, my cover's blown. I got to be careful," and that kind of thing. But so yeah, it's a much drier account, and the best parts are when he's talking about the card game, because they're playing baccarat in the book, not poker. And the first thing, Le Chiffre just keeps winning all these coups that he's pulling up, and Bond just keeps trying to call all the bets until he does figure out the tell and flushes him out the next round. So that was and it's interesting that they say that the games in these at the casino, the high stakes games, don't start until like 11:30 at night, and they go on for like 4 or 5 hours. I'm like, wow, that's kind of nuts. But so yeah, so the card game was the best part, the most suspenseful part, but still very dry in the way that it's written. But I could see why back then that was probably really popular for people to read because he's at this really luscious hotel and casino and has this beautiful woman and that kind of stuff. But I could see why the other novels were a lot more popular because they were a lot more fun and
Well, and
escapist.
perhaps it is my understanding of the adaptation of the book just as being faithful to once Lashif is dispatched, it does go on longer. And people watching the movie at the time, if I recall, were like, why is this movie still going on? And it does, as there is sort of a denouement at the end of the film. Maybe that's what I was super excited with. You are right in terms of how dry the writing was. But I was expecting, like, this would have been the book that I read in between No Time to Die, not No Time to Die, Die Another Day, Die Another Day, and Casino Royale. And so reading this at the time was almost like a regrounding of the character for me. It was a nice reset to remember that it's not all space lasers and tsunamis. And I also very much enjoyed the sensual aspects of the prose in terms of how Bond eats and the cigarettes he smokes and the alcohol he drinks. And that is something that Fleming was always very interested in whenever whenever Bond orders breakfast, it takes about a page and a half. And I really enjoyed that to get into the head of the character.
Yeah, and he's smokes like a fiend, like 7 packs a day or something like that. And it's like, yeah, you're not going to look as great as you do if you're smoking 7 packs a day.
Very bad for the chest.
But yeah, he does get into that, which is why on the website they're very much into, on the official James Bond website, the merchandise is all a lot of it's more high end. I mean, yeah, they have some accessories and cheaper stuff for people, but most of the things they really advertise are super limited, high end, expensive type stuff to mimic that whole aesthetic.
Well, and it did become like, and as we've discussed before, my favorite James Bond is Timothy Dalton, and he was always very expressive about going back to the books and going back to Fleming. And I did enjoy the sort of lifestyle that was presented in Casino Royale. Like these guys, like if you were a 00 in MI6, the possibility of survival, as is intoned in the movie, not very long. You're probably not going to live that long. So you enjoy the finer things in life and you take as many risks as possible so that you can enjoy what little time that you have left. And the gambling really speaks to that. I tried to learn Baccarat from the book, but I honestly didn't even understand it until we saw the CBS production with Barry Nelson.
Yeah, the way he talks about it, it's like he's not too descriptive in the right ways. Like he describes it for people who probably have already seen it at the table and know what it actually looks like. Same thing when he's describing, like you said, his meals and like some of the stuff I'd have to look up. Like, wait, what are you talking about? And that kind of stuff and some of the other terms. But it's written funny because he's writing it for people who seem to be familiar with that whole world, but the biggest fans of the books were blue collar people were the ones reading it the most. But yeah, I was trying to follow the Baccarat aspect. I could follow a little bit of it, but the you're right, the 1954 film does a better job.
Absolutely. And in terms of, well, the 1954 film is a television live production, is as good a place to start as any because it would have been the first time that Fleming had sold the rights to one of his stories to be produced and made into at that time a television production. But those rights being held by CBS and floating around throughout the years was the reason that we don't get Casino Royale until 2006, making it a prequel.
I know that the Connery and Lazenby films had a bit of crossover in terms of continuity, but I never considered the continuity continuing into Roger Moore simply because he was all the other actors were the same, like M, Q, and Moneypenny. And yeah, I know they had the little teaser at the beginning of Your Eyes Only where he goes to Tracy's grave and all that, but I perceive that as being more of a generic thing that's given in his backstory. like with all the backstories. Like even Pierce Brosnan's Bond mentions that he was married once or whatever, or not that he was married once, but he lost someone close or whatever. And I thought that, well, you could read that two ways. Either he's talking about Tracy, which is owing to the literary heritage, or he's talking about, Paris Carver from the previous film, Tomorrow Never Dies.
True.
But because some people have tried to come up with crazy headcanon to justify how all of them up until Craig are in the same continuity, and it doesn't really work. But it's like, it's a Bond movie, enjoy it. Like, don't think about the crazy continuity stuff. So
I do agree with you to a certain extent. I think that you're watching a James Bond adventure. Just enjoy this one. There's not a whole lot that you have to do research for. But I also do have my own, as you say, headcanon, my own personal theories on it, is that from Dr. No to Die Another Day. No Time to Die. No, wait, Die Another Day.
Yeah, you had it right the first time.
Yeah. That is the framework of the James Bond progression of his career, and you can shuffle in the Daniel Craigs as you wish, where you wish. That's how I do it, and that butts up against Swan and Tracy. Like, that doesn't reconcile, it doesn't jive. Having cell phones before Dr. No doesn't jive, but it's just, again, it's what I do to maintain some semblance of putting them all on the same shelf and not thinking that this is the 21st century of James Bond, which owes so much to the Bourne series. And with the Bourne series, it is even like a refined version of that. It kind of reminds me of the teaser trailer, or no, just the regular trailer for GoldenEye, when it's like, when the world is in danger, we turn to one man, and then Brosnan comes up and it's like, you were expecting someone else. It's like, don't worry about it. This is the James Bond version of the modern action movie, and I think it does well. And one of my main criticisms that I've always had with Daniel Craig is, I've said it, my dad has said it, other people who are Bond fans have said it, is that they wish that Daniel Craig was having a little bit more fun being James Bond. But rewatching Casino Royale today, he's having fun. Like, it's not as dour as I thought, or I remembered.
Yeah, I noticed it does have a bit of, even though he's like a bit older in the role, like I think it was 37 when they started filming, 37, 38, he still feels younger as well, because it is a rookie story, and a character who's naive and being taken advantage of that way. And I felt that more watching this after reading the book, because in the book you get that a lot too. I mean, in the book he almost feels a little bit too self-serious, even though he keeps screwing up left, right, and center. Like, he blows his cover so early, he's taken advantage of, blah, blah, blah. But in the movie, I felt that there was a bit more of that bit of, you could tell he's having fun with it, a bit colorful and childish about it, but still not. Like, again, going, like, the Bond of the later films, like Skyfall, Spectre, No Time to Die, is not going to jump into an embassy and go shoot the place up and kill somebody to get a Bond. Like, that's, like, no, So I did think they did capture some of the youthful references of the character from the book.
Well, and in the book, just with him, it was a story that does, as you mentioned, he ultimately does retire and then says, no, never mind. But it's interesting to start off a book series. Not that he knew it was going to be a series when it was published, but to start off a book series with your protagonist quitting and then saying, no, I'm actually committed to this, is, I enjoy that in terms of the characterization. How many of the Bond books have you read?
Several, probably not all of the short story collections, but most of the other novels. And the other novels I started with because I knew that there wasn't really a strict continuity except for the Blofeld related ones. And I started sampling Casino Royale when I first bought it, because I bought all of them at the same time at a used bookstore that's since gone out of business. Each of them were at most, like, I think $1.75 a piece. Oh, nice. And so it was so dry when I was reading it that I thought, I think I'd rather start with one of the other ones. So then I read some of the others, and they're more adventurous and more fun. Whereas this was just, and there's a lot of pontificating in this book where he goes on about Bond talking about the morality of the Cold War, how Le Chiffre is not a bad guy, but he's doing his own thing and I'm doing my thing, and for the country, all this kind of crap that just it's like, yeah, I get it, because that's where Fleming's head was at when he was writing it, but sometimes it just gets to be a little much.
Now, in terms of the creation of the character, and you can help, not just being a Bond fan, but also being a Star Wars fan and all around just a Christopher Lee fan, I think we both are, was the basis for James Bond Christopher Lee? Because I know that Christopher Lee and Ian Fleming were step cousins.
They were, but I also know that Fleming was thinking more of Hoagie Carmichael, which he actually mentions in the book.
Oh,
because
okay.
Mathis asked Vesper, what do you think of Bond after they first meet? She's like, hey, he reminds me a bit of Hoagie Carmichael. And that was what Fleming had told the producers. He had been the person he kind of based it on, as well as his friend Ivor Bryce, who's the one who convinced him to go into business with Kevin McClory and the whole Thunderball fiasco. But Ivor Bryce, you could tell from watching the documentary that's on the film, that he's clearly channels that whole Bond personality. Definitely, especially with the way he's living down in Jamaica or the Bahamas, rather, down in Nassau, and reading all about that was really fun. But yeah, he was thinking more of Hoagie Carmichael, but Christopher Lee, I wouldn't be surprised if he infused some of that in there, because Christopher Lee definitely conveys that all in everything that he does.
Well, and yeah, I think he would have been a good James Bond, but thankfully we got him as our Scaramanga. Now, the first, and you're right about the other books being a little bit more adventuresome and more action oriented, as opposed to sort of tense thriller presentation.
Yeah, like I think the biggest action scene would be more or less the bombing outside the casino, which I thought was just silly for an assassination attempt. The car chase, and then instead of Le Chiffre poisoning his drink, which I thought would have been more appropriate for a book set in the 50s, he has a guy sneak up behind him and just put a gun right at the base of his spine, and Bond fakes fainting by thrusting back in his chair to knock the guy over, and loosens the gun from him, and the guy skippers away as quickly as possible. And that's the only bits of action in the whole book. It's very, very dry in that regards. It's mostly him and his Bond and his lifestyle, like you mentioned, talking about ordering breakfast and all the cigarettes and the drinks and that kind of stuff.
Well, and by the time, and the next book in the series is Live and Let Die. And when you do get and I started reading Live and Let Die right after I finished Casino Royale, and that is much more adventuresome. Problematic, obviously, there is the Fleming estate that has decided to reintroduce.
There's that in Casino Royale as well, the way he describes the Bulgarian hitmen who tried to kill him, and the way he describes Vesper and women in general.
Does he use the word swarthy?
No.
Okay, that's okay.
The word subhuman. Exactly, because he's talking about them like they're the big dumb oafs type thing, and I'm like, oh my god, I'm barely 30, 40 pages into this, and then when his reaction to finding out that M is sending a woman to work alongside him is like, oh god, they should go back to the kitchen and do this kind, and that kind of stuff, and I'm like, I can't. It's like, and it's no mystery, like I said in our chat the other day, why you don't see his books on shelves anywhere in books, at least not in bookstores across America. But even then, it's still very, and I guess you could get away with editing some of it, because he only leans into that briefly in the first book, but it's still a bit dry. I don't think that if the current Bond novels were being written with that same level of dryness, I don't think they would be flying off the shelves. In the way that John le Carré is, whose books are on every bookstore across America all the time.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. Now it's a weird situation for me living in Canada, because as we've mentioned before, James Bond is in the public domain in Canada. The novels themselves, if I had a printing press and I just wanted to sell Bond novels, I can. It's not a problem. We do have them, like in our Barnes and Noble North chapters Indigo. They're available, and they're $15 a pop, soft cover, and you can get them fresh and new. But also, as you make that comparison between Bond, which is much more of a pulp than John le Carré and the Smiley books, I think that the movies also sort of, if you're a fan of the movies and you go to a bookstore to try and get into the series of novels, you're going to be disappointed, I think.
Definitely, because it is very pulp. And I mean, yeah, the Bond movies obviously has a lot of silly camp and stuff in there, like especially with the Roger Moore movies and even the tail end of Connery. But it still feels like it has a base tone that you could follow for like a regular movie.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't feel as pulpy, even though like on paper you look at what Live and Let Die is, the script for the movie version, and it seems like, oh, this is going to be a pulp camp adventure. And yeah, there's camp elements in it, obviously, but it doesn't feel totally schlocky and camp like some of the other stories do. Like, for instance, as I mentioned, Casino Royale, the book felt a bit too self-serious at times, and needed a bit of extra spunk that like what the movie gives you.
Well, and also I'm somewhat biased towards either horror novels or action novels. I don't understand. Although, like, I understand that those genres exist. I understand that they're very popular and that there are people who like them. And the ability to make someone's heart race through just prose is an incredible talent. But it is much more of a character world exploration with sort of intrigue. I wouldn't even say thriller, but more of a political intrigue or a spy intrigue novel than it is a heart racing adventure book.
Right. Exactly. And like you mentioned with prose, some books like, like Moby Dick is all about prose, not about plot or character. Like
Mm-hmm.
right now I'm reading Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, and my God, the prose is unbelievable. It's just pure prose and savagery, but wonderful. Definitely not going to find that in Fleming's books or even Le Carré's books.
Terrier is here somewhere. I just wanted to say hello to Terrier, and that being said, I guess we should check in with the chat just briefly.
Oh, we should.
Why not? Otherwise, this is just a Zoom. Plocksword says, "Hail, ahoy, Plocksword! Thank you for being here, and thank you for being a Bond fan, yo. I thought everybody could take a little bit of a Picard break. I know I needed to, and thanks to Jill, we did watch. But speaking of Jill, thank you for being here, and Captain Finity is here as well. Excellent. This is funny. Plocksword says, "Is this the Casino Royale with Woody Allen, or the one with the guy who sold a ton of Haagen-Dazs?" You know how many people, when I was on, being an internet vagrant, I was like, "Oh, we're going to be talking about Casino Royale on Thursday," and they're like, "Are you going to be talking about the Peter Sellers one?" And I was like, no.
Tell those people we already talked about that, and they could find the video in our playlist, Martinis, Gadgets, and Guns.
Perfect segue. I was going to say, if you are a James Bond fan and you would like to hear our opinions on any of the films, we've reviewed them all on the Fantasmagorium show. Just hit up playlists, and you will see a lot of videos. Some of them I remember.
Find the guy who sold a ton of Haagen-Dazs.
Is that Barry Nelson?
Is it? I don't know. Maybe it was, if he did a bunch of commercials for that, perhaps. But no, this is neither. This is the Daniel Craig version that we're kind of talking about all of them, I guess.
Well, yeah, like we did the 60th anniversary last year of the James Bond cinematic experience, and I was going over our introductions. I cracked open the old Martinis, Gadgets, and Guns Word file, and it was like, when we were talking about that for Dr. No, and it was like, it's not the anniversary of the character in general. That'll be next year. So this has been an anticipatory date going for a while. And Ploxard says, your nomenclature has evolved. How much longer before your final form? Referring to Jill, who is anti-derivative Spartacus, based on an April Fool's decision. And she'll be back to being anti-derivative Jill on Saturday.
Okay, I was wondering about that because I wasn't in on the joke.
Oh, and Ploxord. Oh, let's see. Um, lemon pie muffin. Yes, muffin. I say it with affection. Captain Finity, ahoy and high fives. Um, Lemon says, "Hi, Scotty, Jill, Captain, and Cat. I'm sure. Come on, guys." And Captain Finity saying it is certainly an improvement on what he said yesterday. Oh yeah, no, I lit a place on fire and flipped a table. It was a fun thing. Um, anyway, let's see. Ploxard says chronological adherence. You might understand. I shalt remain for the moment. Understood and appreciate that you do. Let's see. Thank you. It's plot. Oh, Matt G is here, who is looking forward to a Jill, which is fantastic. But thank you, Matt G, for being here. This is a. Oh, right. Lemon says, so what did you think of that brutal cornfield scene? Wait, that's Casino. Oh,
Yep.
and before we start, I just have a quick question. Casino Royale, the film.
Yeah.
Better than The Godfather?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you ever read The Godfather?
No.
That'd be interesting.
I do have his book, The Last Dawn.
Oh, okay. Just so everybody knows, and the reason that I'm bringing, we did this yesterday when we were talking about Spider-Man 2. I did ask Kat if Spider-Man 2 was better than The Godfather. The answer was yes. Is that Kat recently saw The Godfather and meh. So that is a thing. But I would very much like to hear your opinions of the book versus the movie, just so I can hear The Godfather, better than The Godfather.
I'll have to read the book sometime.
Ploxard says consumption is a thing, and it's true, and it is highlighted in the stories by Fleming. He does highlight the sensual nature of just all ingestions, whether it be liquor, food, tobacco, it doesn't matter. He's just like, how good this is? You should try it. Ploxard says James Bond is more than just a man. He's an idea, a force of nature barely held in check by society and the agency directing his assignments. How do you feel about that characterization?
Yeah, that's accurate.
Really?
Well, I mean, yes, he's because look at what he does even in the movie version of Casino Royale. Without any care in the world, he goes storming into an embassy and blasts the place to smithereens. He runs through a construction site and gets construction workers killed. And he's just obsessed, like this feral animal, just like, I got to get that, and I'm chasing it, and I'm not going to stop. And despite M's best efforts, he continues on the job. And even in the second one, where there's no political reason for MI6 to be involved in what's going on down in Bolivia, but again, he's like this. He's on a mission. It's like, I got to find out what this was all about and hunt this guy down. And he's not being held in check by anybody or the society or all the people wanting to rein him in that film either. So yeah, I say that's a good assessment.
But I always thought of James Bond as being the gentleman spy, not necessarily the blunt instrument as he's characterized in the film version of Casino Royale.
Yeah, he's also the gentleman spy in the book. He's a bit of the gentleman spy for sure, even though you have a lot of that pulpy aspects of it. But he did transcend being that, like the name James Bond. What does that mean to people? It is an idea. It's the idea that high society, really, but not the snobbish type of high society. Like, he's the guy you're going to find him in the best restaurants, the best hotels, the best casinos, the hottest women in the world, the absolute best dining that you could expect anywhere. Like you said, it takes a page and a half for him to order breakfast, and it's just that high living, like luxurious living when you think of him. And he's always going to win against the bad guys no matter what, and always going to be taking down the supervillains and going jet setting and stuff, like a force of nature. It's not because logically it obviously doesn't track that you would ask one agent to try and save the world from these megalomaniacs or whatever, which obviously in and of themselves aren't really believable, but you accept it, you buy into it because he is like a force of nature, and you're totally buying into that whole brand that is James Bond. Like you mentioned the way the consumption in the chat there, Fleming had the same type of idea. He's like, it's better to live every night like Saturday night and have a short life than live a long life and only have Saturday night once a week. And that's
Yeah.
certainly what he did.
Yes. And yes. Yeah, okay. Then I'll allow it. And I don't know how this is going to go over. So Lemon, this is on you. Lemon says, "Hi, Kathy." Yeah, fair enough. That's how that went over. So, I do like how in the film, and I'm not sure if it's referenced in the book, but when Felix says to Bond, when it's in the film, he says, like, "You're not buying in again," and Bond wasn't going to, and so the CIA fronts the money so Bond can get back in. And there is a line that says, "Does it look like we need the money?" And was that in the book? Was there some reference to that in the book?
No, not really. I don't recall him saying that. I do recall where it was at, though. Let's see. Because he meets Felix. Like, they don't really talk about there's no like deal or arrangement with him to let Felix take in Le Chiffre or anything like that. It's like he meets Felix, and it's like, oh hey, and you work for the CIA, but they didn't have that. Let's see. Vivian Rose 77. Let's go back and check. But yeah, keep talking for a second while I look that up.
Well, and the reason I bring it up is just because with the extravagance of his tastes, if you will, I always thought that they were government-funded vices. I always thought that the things that he enjoyed about life, part of the reason that he got to live the lifestyle that he did, was because it was basically funded by MI6. And maybe it was either the book or the film that finally made me realize that I think it was the book that informed my decision after hearing that line in the film, where it was, oh yeah, he doesn't have the money to live like a millionaire, but he does have a tab, or he has funding from his organization. Universal Exports is very good to him.
Sure.
But all in all, I do appreciate the excess that Bond indulges in. It's one of my favorite things. I should probably not try and emulate a fictional character because they will never die. But, well, much like tomorrow, will never die. Out of the books that you have read, which one stands out as being your favorite?
Ooh, that would be Moonraker was pretty good. As was Dr. No. But it's been a long time since I've read them. I'd have to go back and read them again.
Well, and big shout out to Tony, Bunyan Snipe from the Post Geek Singularity. He's still modding for Rob, isn't he?
Yes.
And his favorite dream of James Bond is getting an actual novel accurate adaptation of Moonraker.
Yes.
And I hope it happens. And I hope it is the period piece that he anticipates. Now,
yeah, that would be a very easy one to do because that was took place entirely in like the south of England, and I guess they just didn't feel it would have been as exotic for the earlier movies, and so they just pushed it down the line. But that would have been something to see. But they've alluded to it and picked pieces from it for Diamonds Are Forever, Die Another Day, and other bits of it. But yeah.
Well, and yes, but it's still and that one takes place entirely in England.
Yeah.
Which is interesting as well. And that was an exciting one because there is a car chase in that one as well. Now, sort of segueing over to the film. At this point in 2006, we hadn't seen a James Bond film since 2002's Die Another Day. And there was much brouhaha and hubbub about casting a blonde man as Bond. Daniel Craig received quite the backlash.
Yeah, it's really stupid that people get all worked up over something as simple as hair color. But then again, we have a bunch of trolls in the modern day who freak out about skin color still. So I guess it tracks to some extent.
Well, and being true to the character, I can understand in one way, but also wasn't Roger Moore sort of a dirty blonde boy himself?
Yeah, and in the book, he's kind of described it a little bit that way too. So it's not like it's a big deal. I mean, I was, it seems more logical that you would think, oh, do you think the actor has the chops to do it? Because I first saw him in Layer Cake,
Hmm.
and I thought he could be James Bond from just that. I'm like, yeah, okay. I was fine when because the announcement came in October 2005, right when they started filming, and I had already seen Layer Cake by that time, and I'm like, yeah, okay. And I do. Let's say I do. Yes, I have that one right here. That was
Oh,
good.
nice.
Good movie. Not perfect, but yeah, he was good in that. So I'm like, yeah, he could be James Bond, no doubt.
Well, and the neck and neck of who was going to be the next Bond seemed to be Daniel Craig and Clive Owen.
Yeah,
And I was very much in camp Clive Owen.
yeah. Clive Owen was a big name at that time and really great actor. Henry Cavill was in the running at the time as well.
Too
Uh,
young.
yes, they thought he was too young, and it's funny they did think he looked too much like Superman, which is one of the things they commented on.
Hmm.
But yes, I think they. I mean, Clive Owen would have been a remarkable Bond as well, but at that time, I think he was already a bit too old for the role. If you're trying to start for Casino Royale, or at least he seemed that way in the movies that I'd seen him in up to that point. But he would have been a great Bond.
I think he would have been a great Bond, but also, well, in a different world, if different stars had aligned. But if you look at Daniel Craig and Clive Owen, not saying that he looks old now, but he's certainly aged more rapidly
Mm-hmm.
than Daniel Craig did. But that is also he was like Clive Owen was never really required to get into the level of shape and sort of maintain his body as Mads Mikkelsen's Le Chiffre. You've taken very good care of your body, Mr. Bond. Um, but I am once I saw it, and this is one of the adages that we've had about any new James Bond who's coming out. I will believe it, like it or dislike it, once we sit down in the theater and we watch and see how this new guy does as Bond. And
I
I
even
think that Daniel Craig did it. I think he did it.
Yeah, I think Idris Elba was the right age back then too. If they wanted him back at that time, but he hadn't been as big of a star yet. Even though, ironically, actually, in most cases, Bond is what makes your career. But that would have been a good choice too. But I think they made the right call with Daniel Craig for this version of the character for sure, no doubt.
Well, and I was just going to blurt out unintelligently, what has Daniel Craig done lately? But he's actually had a second, not a second coming, but he's certainly not cursed by his Bond tenure because he's doing very well with the Benoit Blanc. He was in the Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Um, he is, it brought him to an international stage, being James Bond, but he certainly maintained it and did well without parodying or living off of that James Bond persona either.
Right? Yeah, he did. He's had plenty of a career aside from that.
Um, so when it was announced and it was going to be Casino Royale, there was much ado, and everyone was very excited just because it was the last of the novels that to be adapted. Returning, we have Judi Dench
Oh,
as M,
yes.
which is nice. Which is
Well,
nice, but again, that throws a whole monkey in the wrench about continuity as well.
it doesn't matter. She was too perfect for that role, and she has one of the best entrances in this movie as well. Like for her,
Was
so when she's
that's
storming out of the boardroom meeting over Bond, crashing the embassy, saying, like they're even smart enough not to ask us what we do. They don't care what we do. They care what we get photographed doing. And it's like, why? How can hell Bond could be so stupid? I give him a 00 license, and what does he do? He celebrates by shooting up an embassy. An agent ever did that, he'd have to kill himself or have the good sense to defect. Christ, I missed the Cold War. That is the best entrance for M that we've seen in a Bond movie. That's just great. It's like, okay, no bullshit, total hard ass. I love it.
well, and their relationship. obviously, Judi Dench's M was introduced in GoldenEye, and then carries through until Skyfall. Which do you prefer? Or Judi Dench with Pierce Brosnan, or Judi Dench with Daniel Craig?
Probably, it's kind of a hard question because I feel that I think my favorite M performance from her is actually in this movie, Casino Royale, because she's very tough on him. She's not sympathetic, but she trusts him, and she keeps giving him a bit of a longer leash. And then she does show some concern towards the end, and like being delicate around his retirement or his resignation message, saying, "Oh, we'll get around to that later. We're going to talk about that later." Trying to figure out how to reel him in. Whereas, Tomorrow Never Dies, she also has really great moments in those other films, but it's not as personal. Like her sitting down with Bond, in GoldenEye, is like her more or less breaking the fourth wall and talking to the fans about, yeah, we get it. This is a bit of an outdated kind of franchise, but we're carrying it on anyway. Whereas The World Is Not Enough, I think, had a more closer, a bit more personal type of friendliness with Bond. But here, even though it's a separate continuity, I feel your feelings for M are inevitably carried over from the previous 4 films. And that's why you feel so much for her when she dies in Skyfall, because it's like, this has been M for the last 17 years, and it's not rather than just the last 3 films. So,
yes. I always found that the relationship between M and Bond in the Craig movies was much more sort of matronly.
Yeah.
As opposed to, it was almost an adversarial professionalism that was happening with Pierce. And I liked that better.
Yeah.
Because again, it's not about reeling in Bond because he's a blunt instrument who will go and shoot up an embassy. It's more about his cavalier attitude. But the differences between, we could have an entire show about the differences between Daniel Craig and Pierce Brosnan. I know that Roger Moore did say that he echoed something that a lot of people have said and that I've already brought up, in terms of, I just wish he had more fun being Bond. But again, going back to this, and I'd like to go double check Skyfall again, just to see, maybe I'm looking at it a little too harshly, because there is a sense of play, especially when he picks up Demetrios's concubine, consort. Is it his wife?
Yeah.
Okay. And does the whole roundabout back to the hotel. It's playful. And even when he kills the guy who's trying to bomb the airplane in Miami, when he smiles after blowing him up, it's like, oh, okay. He's having fun, not necessarily in the best way, but totally.
Yeah.
We also have Felix Leiter, played by Jeffrey Wright. Fantastic. We haven't seen him throughout the Brosnan era.
Yeah, not at all.
And so it's nice to have a return of Felix Leiter, and I think Jeffrey Wright knocks it out of the park. He's in this one. He's barely in Quantum. He doesn't show up in Skyfall or Spectre. And when he returns in No Time to Die, it is, well, spoilers for No Time to Die. See, I did it properly this time.
Time to Die.
He dies.
Yeah.
And it makes you feel something. Because you do know the character, and I think he played him quite well. His absence was missed. Watching one of the Daniel Craig movies without Jeffrey Wright is kind of like watching an Indiana Jones movie without Sala. You understand why he's not there, but you wish he were.
Exactly. And the first 2 movies for the Craig films feel tonally, yes, they're very different in terms of, one's a more laid back, slower movie. Like Quantum is all over the place, but the character feels the same. between both films, and the world feels the same because you have Felix in both movies, and the direct sequelness of it and carrying it over, and the whole aesthetic of those two movies feels very similar to each other. Whereas Skyfall and Spectre are kind of their own separate thing because both of those movies are like have this really luscious cinematography, but they're what I call postcard movies, where every location they go to looks pitch perfect on a postcard, but not real. Like the places you go to in Casino Royale and Quantum of Solace are populated. There's people there because it's real places that you're going to. Whereas Skyfall and Spectre, everything's like they're like the only ones out in these beautiful landscapes, or like the car chase in Rome, and you see all these cars parked everywhere, but there's like nobody to be found anywhere, no other street noise, nothing, you know. Whereas No Time to Die gets a little bit of a mix of both. It still feels fantasy, still feels a bit like the real world, but with his foot firmly in fantasy, and bringing back Felix is really nice, and the whole homages to obviously Dr. No and that kind of stuff really makes that work. So yeah, you do a lot in the middle films.
Now this is also a break from tradition when it comes to James Bond movies, but we don't get a Q, we don't get a Moneypenny. There is some tech. You get the little tracking device that is injected into Daniel Craig in a beautiful moment where he's just arbitrarily injected with something. He looks at the guy who doesn't and goes, "Ow," which is so cool.
Yeah.
I just like that because usually when a doctor comes over to inject something, they're like, this may sting a bit. And there's none of that, and the response is great.
He says, "Ow," and the guy just kind of meekly smiles at him as he leaves.
And no Moneypenny for this one, and not for the next one either.
That was a mandate by Daniel Craig, actually, to bring them in to Skyfall.
Well, and good for Craig and good for us. I like Ben Whishaw and Naomi Harris as Q and Moneypenny or Eve, respectively. How do you feel about the James Bond movie without them? Did you feel that it wasn't necessarily all of the new Bond that you wanted? Did you feel that there were components missing?
No, I didn't feel they were missing at all from the first two films. And even as much as the second one embraces the whole Jason Bourne-ness of the whole thing, I still didn't feel they were needed in the story. Because again, this is kind of Bond as a rookie, whereas when he meets Q in Goldfinger, he meets him actually in From Russia with Love, but when he meets him again in Goldfinger, it feels like they have more of a familiarity with each other and a bit more of a veteran aspect to it. Whereas in Casino and Quantum, he's still rookie, and it would be kind of odd if you have, especially if you had him meeting a Q who was that young Q, by Ben Whishaw, it would be a little weird. So I like that they hold that off until later. And then Moneypenny, well, yeah, he never goes back to MI6 headquarters, so it wasn't going to fit, because you didn't have that. This wasn't the classic Bond movie. Like if this had been more of a classic Bond movie, then after the airport scene in Miami, he would have gone back to MI6 in London and gotten the mission from there and met with Moneypenny. And yeah, they could have done that, but that would be probably more associated with the beginning of a Bond movie instead of over halfway through. And so it's like, nah, we'll just keep it where we're at and just have him go back to the Bahamas and then go straight to the casino. So I didn't feel that was missed. Kind of like in GoldenEye, where you don't have him get the mission until 45 minutes in, which is a little, not the halfway point, but it's still a little awkward. It's like, oh, okay, maybe don't do that again. Yeah,
Well, and that's interesting just because, I always found that GoldenEye it was slow to start, but once it finally gets going, it's amazing. But thank you for bringing up GoldenEye, because we have Martin Campbell to thank for both GoldenEye and Casino Royale.
Yes, and I have my fingers crossed that they will get him to direct the next one. Everything comes in threes.
The Martin Campbell Bond trilogy would be outstanding. The only thing I would say to warn anyone who is looking forward to that is that it is the same man who directed Green Lantern.
Yes, he has a few stinkers in his filmography, and I recently saw The Protege, and that was I didn't care for that one.
Is that with Michael Keaton?
Yeah.
My dad loves that movie.
I wanted to love it. I thought there was too much going on that I couldn't really invest in it, but whatever.
I would recommend it just based on Michael Keaton's performance, but
Yeah, he's really good. Yeah, Michael Keaton's really good in it. As is Maggie. They're both good. But yeah, whatever.
Mhm.
But yeah, Martin Campbell just brings something to these film that he has a knack for it, and it's like I hope that they have the and they'll just bring him back. Come on, you got to do it.
Well, and again, there have been throughout the history of the James Bond films, there's been, stables of directors. You have your John Glenn. You have you do have people who directed them. Why am I blanking on Goldfinger and Dr. Terrence Howard? No, not Terrence
No,
Howard.
no,
Terrence,
no. Terrence Young did Doctor No from Russia with Love and Thunderball, and you're
yes,
thinking of Guy Hamilton, who did Gold.
Guy Hamilton. Yes.
Yeah, he did Goldfinger and Diamonds Are Forever, Live and Let Die, and Lewis Gilbert for You Only Live Twice. We had, and then the editor, God, I'm blanking on his name, who got promoted for On Her Majesty's
Under Majesty's.
service. God, what's his name? His name, I got it right here. His name, Peter Hunt. That's right, Peter Hunt.
Yes.
Which is surprising that they got that you just get promoted. Hey, you want to draw? It's like, okay,
Yes, I do.
It's like, yes, I would very much like to do that. But then
and it's a gorgeous movie. You were saying, sorry.
Yeah, and then you had Guy Hamilton come back for Man with a Golden Gun, and from then on, that's where. And then Lewis Gilbert returned for The Spy Who Loved Me, which makes sense because that's kind of like his makeshift remake of You Only Live Twice, and that's where. And then he did the same thing with Moonraker, so it's like you have that in a sense as a Bond trilogy because they all have climaxes and plots that are pretty much the same in a way. And that's where we finally seeked into John Glenn for all those years. And after Martin Campbell, we had as a one-off, we got Roger Spottiswoode who started out as an editor as well for other movies like all sorts of stuff. And then the late Michael Apted for The World Is Not Enough, Lee Tamahori for Die Another Day, Martin Campbell for Casino. Then another one-off with Mark Forster, then Sam Mendes for two of them, and finally Cary Fukunaga.
And I'm trying to think of, and I know we've ranked them. I know we've done all of that already. I'm just trying to think of which one. John Glenn is kind of the Peter Hyams of the James Bond universe. Just everything seems to be very diegetic. It all seems to be. I guess he did direct the Pigeon double take, so maybe I'm wrong. I do want to say hello to Herc130, who says, "Hey, Herc." No, I said that, but Herc says, "I didn't want to be Bond. Too much work. I wanted to be John Cleese's Q. That's where the money is." Yeah. It's too bad that we didn't get a continuation, although it is kind of beneficial that we didn't get a continuation of John Cleese as Q.
Yeah, that was something they were setting up because I think at the time they still intended Pierce to come back for a fifth movie, and then even though Die Another Day was the most financially successful Bond film up to that time and actually had a mixed reception, surprisingly more positive reviews at the time than I would have thought. It just in the aftermath of it, once the cooling off period set in, it's like, yeah, we can't, do like we it's getting too insane and too fantastical. But I thought they should have given him his own For Your Eyes Only, if you will, like something more grounded to go out on, because he certainly still had it. I think he was a great. I think Pierce Brosnan is a great Bond. He was the first one I saw, one of my favorites. I don't think he ever got the perfect movie though.
Well, really?
Yeah, because rewatching GoldenEye, I like that it has its own very distinct feel with the soundtrack and everything. But watching it, I just felt he was a bit stiff. Like I had complaints about the villain, and it feels like, okay, you had that thing where in the original script for Property of a Lady, it was Bond's mentor who turned out to be the villain, and it involved the nukes up in Scotland. But once you change the script around, it's like there was no reason to carry over the villain being somebody from Bond's past, and it feels like they just wanted to do that anyway. So it's like, oh, well, let's just have it be his old partner, even though it doesn't really make sense for the story why Trevelyan became 006 in the first place. Like, why is that even a plot point? It's like, we don't know. And I just thought he was a bit dry. Like, I liked Oromov a lot more as the villain, and it did feel like, again, very much its own movie, and a lot of it had to do with the soundtrack and cinematography, and Pierce just felt like a bit stiff, a bit like he's kind of nervous, like wanting to put on a good impression for his first day at work kind of thing, whereas Tomorrow Never Dies is a bit more relaxed, but that's, again, like everybody says, it's more like a 90s action movie version of James Bond, which it is, even though I love the villain, and I find that to be one of the most enjoyable ones that he did. But it's also, it doesn't feel like your typical Bond movie because it takes place over the course of 2 days and they're trying to up the stakes and it's like trying to feel really fast. Whereas World Is Not Enough, it's like, yeah, you got the whole Christmas Jones thing, and which is a bit, and then M getting kidnapped in the field and that whole thing. I was like, I don't know if we needed that, but that's close to being my favorite of his. Whereas Die Another Day, it's just like everybody's trying to look cool and sound cool to a 14-year-old rather than, just making a great movie.
Now, do you recall the name of the actor who plays Mathis? Because now that we've sort of delved into
Giancarlo Giannini.
I'm sorry?
Giancarlo Giannini. Very great actor.
Incredible actor. I first encountered him while watching Hannibal, the Ridley Scott directed Silence of the Lambs sequel.
And he was one of the best things about that movie, which there weren't many good things about it. He was great. Spetapazzi.
I have never revisited it. I saw it in the theater, but the only thing I remember of it is, spoilers for Hannibal, is Ray Liotta eating his own brain and Mathis.
And Gary Oldman was quite fantastic in that as well.
Unrecognizable, great performance, incredible prosthetics.
Yeah.
But the Mathis, Giancarlo is the man in that film.
Yes, for sure. He was excellent, and he's excellent as Mathis. And I wish that there was more of Mathis. I mean, yes, he comes back in the second one, and we talked about the continuity issues with the fact that it's in the story. It's only like a couple days later, but it feels like a lot more time has passed given where he's at and all that. But I still liked it, and I wish that the Mathis and Bond relationship went for more movies. I really liked that character, and I thought he did a really great job of playing him. So that's somebody I miss in the later films of Craig as well.
Well, and the reason I bring Mathis up and Giancarlo up so quickly, I can't pronounce the last name. I'm not Italian. Is that there is, again, when you're comparing, and again, it's a comparison when it comes to James Bond's, as Lemon Pie says, Roger Moore is the Bond I grew up on. And everyone has the one that they grew up on and their favorite, the one that they saw first, the one that their dad watched or mom, and like whatever but there is the one that you sort of gravitate towards. And then when a new one comes along, you do have a tendency to sort of say, well, they're no Sean Connery, which everyone says, but there is a comparison. But if you do look at the people who do return for each of the films or subsequent films, like you get Joe Don Baker coming back for two of the Pierce Brosnan movies, but Mathis being there for the first one and Quantum of Solace is amazing.
Yeah, and I'm surprised they waited that long to bring in the Mathis character from all the other films that they could have used him in, because he's just because in the book it's established that Bond and Mathis have worked with each other before, kind of like he's the European version of Felix. I mean, Bond is more British, Northern Europe. You don't think, when you think of Europe, I don't tend to think of like England that much. I think of like, Italy, France, Spain, Portugal, Germany, Luxembourg, Belgium, Netherlands, Denmark, all of that, Norway, Sweden. So when I say Europe, I think that Mathis is like the European version of Felix, and then Bond is like England. So I'm surprised that they didn't use Mathis more in the other movies over the years, just because of how loosely adapted those are from their respective source material. So it was nice to finally see him in here.
And unceremoniously dispatched in Quantum.
Yeah, I mean, I get the plot point, like why it happens. I just don't get why the screenwriters felt the need to do that. It's just
there was a strike.
I know, but I mean, like, even still, doesn't mean you have to kill him. And they tried to make it a poignant moment, like, oh, you wouldn't care when he throws him in the dumpster. And it's like, well, why throw him in the dumpster the dumpster is literally on the opposite side of this very short street where these two cops have just been shot, and he leaves them there. It's like, you could at least lie him on the sidewalk or something, but no, let's just throw him in the dumpster. It's like, okay.
Yeah.
It's a shame because again, I really love that whole world they created with him and Mathis and Vesper and Felix and him, and the whole world of this movie and these first two movies. That was really great. I'd love to see those characters and other adventures.
Well, yeah, I would love to. I would have loved to have seen Wade come back in subsequent Bond movies. I did like it when Robbie Coltrane's character came back in Tomorrow. The World Is Not Enough. Have you ever done the all in? Sorry,
Raise a glass to Robbie Coltrane. Great
Hells
guy.
yes, absolutely. But have you ever done the back-to-back all-in-one Casino Royale, Quantum of Solace double bill?
Yeah, plenty of times.
Yeah,
I enjoy it.
And
I enjoy it a lot because after you watch Casino Royale, which is a more laid-back, relaxed kind of tour through this luxury high life stuff, you then get the action movie, and it's Bond kind of unchained, if you will. And so and again, it feels like it's the same world, as tonally different as it is, being much more Jason Bourne action oriented. It still feels like those first two movies are in their own world. And the aesthetic is the same, very much the same. It feels like you're going to real places populated by real people. It's not like the postcard version. It's not like they're not going overboard with color grading and exquisite postcard type cinematography. Like it still feels like you're in the real world, like you're actually there. And so those two, I think it's a great double bill.
Would you be able to check in on the chat? I just have to go and take care of something quickly.
I will. I'm not sure if I have the ability to put the chat on the screen, but let's see.
I do have it starred. If you're looking for a timestamp, it's at 9:43 is where the chat is starred. It's Lemon Pie saying Roger Moore is the Bond I grew up on, and Plocksword at 9:44 saying all the actors brought something to the role of Mr. Bond they portrayed.
Definitely, they did. Like the other adage that people talk about when they're comparing Bonds is like Sean Connery was dark chocolate, George Lazenby's kind of like white chocolate mix, and then you have Roger Moore's milk chocolate, Timothy Dalton's dark chocolate, Pierce Brosnan's milk chocolate, Daniel Craig is dark chocolate. So now we're due for some milk chocolate again with the next actor, and that would be nice. I would like the next era of Bond to keep its foot more planted in fantasy, because that's what separates it from other modern spy films. But yes, every actor brought something. Like Connery had that suave debonair to it, and he clearly enjoyed being Bond. Roger was more kind of cheeky and silly. I mean, George was kind of a one-off and not too much. I never really cared for him as Bond. And then Dalton was closer to the books than probably any of the other actors, which worked really well. Brosnan, I thought, also had the charm and the humor and I still thought he did a good job at channeling some of the debonair of Connery. I don't get why there's a lot of hate for his Bond, but there seems to be. And then Craig is kind of his own thing. He's definitely more serious and all that, but they definitely did. Next comment, I do not have the ability to pull it up. Scott's back. He could do it. Yes, Judi Dench owns a fish and chips chain in the Simpsons universe.
I did not know that. I am so out of touch with The Simpsons, but I'm glad that Judi Dench got a cameo or a guest starring role on The Simpsons. Oh no, she'll beat us, she will, exclaims an employee. I hope it's the angry sea captain. Matt G. Just got back from the theater, Jill. Matt G, what did you see? Interesting. Thus making Judi Dench relevant. Yes, Judi Dench was irrelevant until she guest starred on The Simpsons.
And that's Judy with an I, by the way.
True story.
True story.
Let me see. Scrolling.
And if people are looking for other movie recommendations, Steve has recommended the new movie Air by Ben Affleck.
Yes.
He gave it a high recommendation, a 9 out of 10, I believe.
Well, it's directed by Ben Affleck, is it not?
Yes.
Excellent. Matt G says that he saw a documentary about John Lennon's lost weekend, but they were also showing a Metallica film event about their new album. So I saw most of the John Lennon, then the last part of Metallica. Matt G, my hat is off and I salute you for theater hopping. It's something that I haven't heard in a long time. And scrolling.
I remember when I saw this film, Casino Royale, for the first time. I was in like the second row. It was opening weekend. It was super busy, and no, it was second weekend actually. And I was sitting next to these two guys who seemed to be quite enjoying the movie, but when it ended, they were like, "Yeah, that wasn't very good," and kind of upset, like they expected it to be more of the Brosnan type Bond, bombastic and supervillains, all that type of stuff. And I thought that was funny because they seemed to like it, whereas I was just super glued to it. I loved it. I loved every minute of it. I couldn't wait for this movie to get this on DVD. But I only saw it that one time in theaters. November, I believe it was November 24th, 2006, I believe. Yes,
Well,
true story. I have that somewhere.
you could win a vacation at the Atlantis Casino where is it? Paradise Island in the Bahamas.
Yes, right there where they filmed Thunderball.
Which is, and the locations in this film, the way that they move around the world, I very much appreciated, even if it is a little bit more serious than what we'd been sort of given over the last little while. There was the almost deathly serious Timothy Dalton movies, back to more of a mixture of Connery and Moore with Brosnan. And then when you get to Daniel Craig, very much his own beast. And I like the way that you called it its own continuity. Maybe I'll no, I'm still going to keep it shuffled in, and maybe Spectre can drop in somewhere and we'll put a Skyfall somewhere else. But I do appreciate that it still holds the feeling of a James Bond movie with exotic locations, beautiful women, great action. With the action, this was two trends that were very popular at the time. Not just Texas Hold'em poker, which was exploding, but also parkour.
Yeah, that was the first time I'd seen parkour. I'm like, wow, this is really cool. And then, of course, everybody else tries to imitate it.
Well, and I appreciated they say that you don't have a scene in a movie unless it progresses either character or plot. And I think that the parkour scene in Casino Royale does both, because you do have this agile guy running and sliding through things and getting through very cramped spaces and climbing and running around and everything. And he goes like through a hole in a drywall wall, and Bond just plows through it, which had been established when he does that with the bulldozer as well. And I liked it. And there is an evolution to his character from the beginning when he shoots up the embassy, as he becomes more refined, wearing a tuxedo, playing Texas Hold'em. And then by the end, when he finally, like, to call this an origin story is fair, but I do like that by the end of this movie, we have who we would all consider to be James Bond. He doesn't say the name is James Bond, until the very end. We don't hear the James Bond theme song until the very end. It all ties up perfectly that you just saw James Bond's first mission.
Yes.
Like, I really adore it. And there are some movies, looking at you, Star Trek, where you start off and you have the evolution of Jim Kirk from cadet to captain, no matter how ridiculous that is. And then they do it again in the sequel. And with this one, we start off and it's like, you're a blunt instrument. This is how you got your 00 status. And by the end, he's more methodical, not as much of a bull in the china shop. And it's really satisfying. And when we do get to Quantum, still the same guy, but still aware of what he has to do in this ridiculously tough world of international intrigue. But he's James Bond doing it. He's not relearning the thing that we saw in the last movie.
Right. He's the same guy. And like I say, he's a bit more unhinged. Like
In Quantum?
but also a bit like, well, I mean, not as unhinged as say the chase sequence with Malaka and Casino Royale. Like he does put some thought into a lot of thought in what he does in Quantum, but he is, like you said, you could tell he's James Bond. And so, even in the chase in the first one, like the type of looks that he gives and stuff, it's like, yeah, this guy's got it.
Mm-hmm.
Like when he's talking down to that lesser agent, when he's like, "Stop touching your ear," and he's like totally cool and suave, just sitting there with his arms crossed, just watching the Cobra Mongoose fight, and that's when you just starts barking down this guy's throat over, dude, just chill out, stop touching your ear, acting like he's the total veteran mentor, and he's not, because he's only just gotten his license.
Edge of Time is here, and I really appreciate this, and I laughed out loud, so let's show him. Edge of Time says, what sound does James Bond's doorbell make? Dong. Ding dong. Come on, that's comedy gold. Thank you, Edge of Time, and good to see you, bud.
Yes, thank you for that.
So let's see. Oh, can't go anywhere without talking about Chris Cornell's You Know My Name.
Excellent song. I think it's one of my favorite Bond songs, if not the best.
Yes.
Such great replay value. It's just a great song. Wonderful.
Yeah, and the opening title sequence, obviously a mainstay of any James Bond movie. I like the animated nature of it, the iconography of the suits, and the bullets being spades, and like
killing all the other Bond actors.
Yeah, like it's so. I think it's a great video. Like it's a great music video, as every James Bond opening title sequence should be. And honestly, when you're watching a new James Bond movie or with a new James Bond, the pre-title sequence followed by the opening titles, if you are not sold within those first, let's say, 15 minutes, you're probably not going to enjoy yourself. Like that does, as Steve likes to say, it sets the table. It lets you know what you're in for, and this one does an incredible job at it.
And it does it in black and white to emphasize it even more, and it works really well.
Yes. Well, to show it as being a prequel and being sort of from the past, but also contemporary, there is something about that black and white going back to the roots of Casino Royale and Fleming. Like to have it be sort of referential to the amount of time that has passed. While they do it well in GoldenEye, I think this one is more of a show don't tell as opposed to a telling, which is what you get from M to Pierce Brosnan in GoldenEye. So I do enjoy that. And before, because we're going to have to recap it, because I don't remember anything about your recap from last time, and we have to get to that shortly. But Eva Green, like, the great Bond girl or the greatest Bond girl?
Great.
Who's the greatest?
That's mine. Would probably be Pussy Galore from Goldfinger.
Really? All right.
Yeah, I like her a lot. I like that she is like a rival in a sense to Bond. Like, she can really backsass him a lot, and they kind of have that whole back and forth there, which I liked. That and one of the best introductions as well. My name is Pussy Galore. I must be dreaming.
Mm-hmm.
And talk about being in a fantasy. But whereas, as I've mentioned before, I always thought that Vesper is a bit of this arrogant type thing. Like because in the beginning, it's like you watch it the first time and you wonder what the hell's going on with her, and she's just kind of smug and all that, and kind of iffy, and we find out why, because she's been planning to betray him the whole time. And it's like, oh, she's so smug with him when she first meets him because she knows that whether he wins the card game or not, he's not going to end up with the money. She's already made the plan, And just the way she kind of has that cocky nature of it, but it felt more, I don't know, a bit more arrogant to me. It was like okay with it, but I think she's a great character for the book, for what the character arc is.
But the performance,
The performance is great. Yeah, there's no doubt there. But greatest also comes down to which one do you enjoy the most.
I know, I'm not giving you shit. I'm not saying you're wrong. I would, yeah, I can't argue. Like, Honor Blackman is an incredible presence in Goldeneye. I would probably, like, I would say that sorry?
You said Goldeneye. It's Goldfinger.
My mistake. I've been mixing up. Dude, this is what happens when you ask me to be sober. Things come to me more naturally when I'm a little tips. But my top 3 would be Eva Green as Vesper, Tracy, played by the great Diana Rigg, and again, I can't help it, I likes what I likes. Pam Bouvier, played by Carrie Lowell, is my Bond girl. That is the one that I have the most greatest feeling for. So we've done the parkour. Oh, where's Michael G. Wilson in this movie?
He is the police chief who gets arrested thanks to Mathis, framing him for something. He's like, oh, the miracle what you could do with Photoshop these days, he says. I'm thinking, you'd have a lot of fun today with deepfake.
With deepfakes, yeah. Ugh, weird.
And then, of course, one of the best Bond villains in Mads Mikkelsen.
Oh, my stars. I'm so remiss. I can't believe I forgot.
Yeah, and again, one of the characters has the privilege of having the best people play him. Peter Lorre, Orson Welles, Mads Mikkelsen. It's like, man, this is a great lineup. But Mads just has this natural sense. I like that the character, there's dimensionality to him. Like, he's intimidating, but he's also scared. Like, he's really freaked out. Like, oh, shit, I gotta get this money back, and he just has that. He elevates the role and brings a lot of gravitas to it. In the way that, and it does beg the question: is it because we love the character so much, or is it because it's Mads Mikkelsen? And I tend to lean towards it more being Mads Mikkelsen, even though the dimensionality to the character is welcome.
I like that Lashif is on the back foot for this a lot of the time. He is a defensive villain as opposed to an offensive villain, and what I mean by that is when things go south, and they do, for him, not even at Bond's hand, just at the machinations of him trying to make money from the destruction of the plane, and being pursued by his investors, essentially. Like, I do appreciate that he's not, like, you compare Lashif to someone like Stromberg, and Stromberg, even when he's losing, has no idea that he's losing. But it's nice to see the stakes for the villain, and it connects. And I'm wondering if that. Well, no, I'm not wondering. I think that it is a credit to. Is it Purvis and Wade who wrote this script?
Yeah.
And their characterization adapted from the novel, and the performance by Mads Mikkelsen. This was my first encounter with Mads Mikkelsen, who has obviously gone on to do great things with Hannibal Lecter and with his performances in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah, and Marvel, and this his own Danish films, like Another Round, Riders of Justice, and soon to be Indiana Jones.
I forgot he was going to be the Bond villain. I am looking forward to that. And I said that out loud somewhere, and someone said, really? And I was like, yeah.
Villain?
Yeah, no, it's going to be great. He's going to play a Nazi. I'm going to see if we get demonetized. I'm going to do, that was a science experiment to see if we're going to get demonetized for saying that. Well, without further ado, now that we're an hour and a half into this, let's see how quickly. Please, Kat, would you care to tell me the story of Casino Royale?
Well, we skip the gun barrel logo and go right into this black and white cross-cutting scenario where Bond is seeing this station agent over stolen files that have gone missing and been sold on the black market. And Bond's like, Em wouldn't mind if you made some money on the side. She just would prefer it if it wasn't selling secrets. And he's like, oh, you got the wrong man, Bond. And he reaches into his desk and pulls out his gun and tries to kill him, but there's no bullets in there. He's like, yeah, I checked. And he pulls out his. And then the guy's smart enough. He's like, well, how did he die? He's like, oh, your contact not well. And then we get the flashback of Bond in this really gnarly fisticuffs fight in a bathroom in Pakistan, because there was an extended version of the scene where it's actually at like a lacrosse match, I think it is, or a soccer match, and he's following the guy, shadowing him through the grandstands and through the venue until they go into the bathroom, and he just starts fighting this guy and smashing him against the mirrors, breaking the sink. It's a really brutal fight, and through the cross-cutting, it eventually ends where the guy says, "Oh, don't worry, it's." The Bond eventually drowns the guy apparently in the toilet after breaking his head over the sink, and we cut back to the office and the guy's like, "Oh, don't worry, the second kill is considerably," and then Bond shoots him. He's like, "Yes, considerably," as he holsters the gun.
Now wait just 1 second, because I do love that shot, like the cutaway to when Bond kills the guy. And then it takes a brief, like almost like less than a second, a picture of his family. And then it goes back to him falling over backwards in his chair. And it's like, this is really cold-blooded, which sets the tone for how Bond acts, not only in this film, but throughout his tenure as Bond. Please. I'm sorry. Continue.
Yes, very much so. And then we cut to the end of the flashback, which is the guy getting up off the floor in the bathroom, and Bond's spinning around just in time to shoot him, and that's when it segs into the bullet flying right at you and going into the gun barrel logo with all the blood coming down. That's highly animated, and it looked really cool. Then we get that great main title sequence with Chris Cornell, You Know My Name, and that whole animated sequence was, again, really great. From there, we resume the story in Uganda, because at the time, the LRA was in the news a bit more, and their happenings seem to be being nearby there. And so we see that Mr. White, a mysterious, as we'll later find out, a Spectre agent, is meeting with this guy. I can't presume they never actually label him like who he is. His name's Abano, but we figure he's probably with the LRA. And he's like, "Well, can you guarantee my money's gonna be safe?" Whatever. He's like, "Look, I can just my organization just guarantees the introduction. I can't give you anything else." And so in comes a convoy of small jeeps, and Lashif comes out, and he comes to greet him, and Obano's just kind of lounging back in his chair, just totally nonplussed by this. He's like, "Do you believe in God, Mr. Lashif?" He's like, "No, I believe in a reasonable rate of return." And he's like, "The money's going to be safe." It's like, "Of course." So they make the deal. They give him the money, and then he leaves and drives off, and Mr. White just kind of watches as they drive away. And in any case, you get the sense that even if you didn't know what was going on at the time, that these are bad guys. It's like, okay, rebels, whatever. So he's got their money, and that's what's important. So then we cut to Bond in Madagascar, and they're watching. He and this other agent are watching like this mongoose cobra fight or whatever, and everybody's placing bets on it. And the rookie agent is like, "It looks like him." The Malacca has got the injuries on the side, and Bond's like, "I wonder if they have insurance for that." Insurance for his job title. But then the guy starts touching his ear a bit much, and Bond keeps telling him not to do it, and he's like, "What? Sorry." And Malacca eventually sees it and pauses and gives him that look. And he just starts, the chase begins. Malacca just falls into the pit. The agent trying to pursue him falls as well, pulling out the gun. And Bond's like, "Holster the bloody weapon." But he falls in anyway, and the gun goes off. Everybody starts running. And that's where we have the epic free running sequence, where the guy playing Malacca is actually one of the founders of parkour, apparently, Frenchman. And Sebastian Foucan, as I recall his name was. And Bond ends up chasing him across the town. Yeah.
So are we allowed to say Frenchman, but we're not allowed to say Chinaman?
I don't know why we.
Yeah, fair enough. That wasn't even funny. I appreciate the yawn. Please continue.
So we're chasing him through the construction site, and like you said, Bond breaks through the wall on a bulldozer, starts chasing him up through the construction site. One of the construction workers grabs like this like this welder with sparks and like waves it in his face. I'm like, why are you being so aggressive about this? This is, but whatever. And he ends up falling ultimately to his death because one of the canisters falls down below and catches fire and blows up. Bond continues running through there. He bursts through one of the walls. He jumps onto one of the elevated, apple carts type thing, and he just cuts the handle out from the bottom, so it just drops really quickly. And he just leaps off and starts chasing this guy further into the streets, leaps onto the back of a van, and coolly watches him as he runs into the Nambutu embassy. And Bond follows him in there and just starts shooting the place up, but at first he's careful not to shoot anybody. And it ends with Bond getting the guy outside, and he's cornered, and he shoots Malaka dead in the head and fires at a propane tank to cause an explosion, which should have killed everybody, but it doesn't. And Bond takes off, swipes the backpack that Malaka had, finds the bomb inside, and takes the cell phone and takes off. And from there, we cut to M getting out, as I mentioned earlier, out of the boardroom meeting, talking about, Christ, I missed the Cold War. Really pissed off. And she goes back to her house to find Bond inside her apartment. She's like, "You've got a bloody cheek." And he's like, "Yeah, next time I'll shoot the cameras next time." And she just scolds him about it, criticizes him being a blunt instrument. And, I wanted you to question him, not to kill him, because we're trying to find out how this whole network of terrorists works. He's like, "Well, I did use my judgment. I thought one less bomb maker in the world would be a good thing." And she just gets all upset and scolds him away. And eventually she says, like, "I'm not sure what I'm going to do, but I'm seriously considering handing you over to Madagascar." And he just leaves. He's like, he tells her that, she's like, "And how the hell did you find out where I lived?" And he says, "Well, I thought M was just a randomly assigned code number. I had no idea it stood for." He's like, utter one more syllable, I'll have you killed." It's like, "I knew it was too early to promote you." And he just leaves. He's like, "Mom." And as he's going, she sees that the laptop is still open, which is deliberate because he wanted her to see what he was looking at. So he goes to the Bahamas, where Lashif has his own yacht. And he's playing cards with some people, and he starts bleeding out of the eye, mentioning that it's only a minor derangement to the tear duct, nothing sinister. But he says, "Oh, by the way, you only have a 17.4% chance of making this straight," which intimidates the guy enough to give up. And then he gets called into the back by his henchman, and he sees the newspaper headline about Bond killing Malaka. And he's like, no, just tell our guests to leave and give him 5 minutes or throw him overboard. So Bond arrives in the Bahamas, and he rents a car, and he drives to the casino, is mistaken for one of the valet guys immediately by this annoying, schlubby kind of patron, which a lot of people thought was like a Goldfinger reference because he's dressed in similarly like he's going to go golfing, and kind of schlubby, acting the same way. "You got to make me pay for this, make me wait," and throws him the keys. Bond's like, "Yes, sir. Sorry, sir." So he goes inside briefly, gets in, or takes the guy's car, and he speeds into a parking lot and smashes the guy's rear fender and sets off all the car alarms in the parking lot. This buys him time to sneak into the casino and get into the security tapes. And he finds information about Demetrius because of the information that he got on the phone. And so he sees his car is an Aston Martin, and he goes into the front concierge at that point and tells a white lie that, "Yeah, I accidentally nicked the door with my car. Do you know where this guy lives?" Like, "Oh, Mr. Demetrius, you probably shouldn't tell him if he hasn't noticed." Like, "Well, if I felt compelled to tell him." And she smiles and knows that it's obviously something else, but she doesn't care.
Well, see, and this is what I mean, is that moment was sort of that was Daniel Craig having fun being Bond. That was great.
Yeah, exactly.
Some people thought he was being a jerk, and I was like, no.
He's being Bond.
He's being Bond.
So then we cut to, they do their whole Dr. No thing with him coming out of the water, which I thought was a little weird, but okay. Then you have Solange riding the horse down the beach, and the kid's chasing her, and he sees the house where Demetrius is at and acts all inconspicuous. So then he goes to back to his room on the computer, and Villiers, who is not Tanner this time, but Villiers back at MI6, calls M at home while she's asleep. And he's like, "He's in the Bahamas, Mom." And she's like, "You woke me to share his travel plans." "Well, he's hacked into the network on your ID, Mom." And she's like, "How the hell does he know these things?" And she rolls out of bed and opens the computer, and they're able to see what he's looking at. And she's like, "Oh, Demetrius, that slimy bugger." And he's looking through all of his associates, most of whom have been killed. And then he settles on the sheaf, and she's like, "Oh, the sheaf." And he's like all profound by it, like this means something. So then Bond goes into the main hotel, and he sits down at the table with Demetrios. He gets a drink first at the bar, and the guy whose car he kind of looks at him and kind of recognizes him, but doesn't say anything. So then Bond sits down at the table. He's playing with Demetrios, who's super arrogant and like a total asshole. his wife shows up late to give him a kiss. He's like, if that's for luck, you're 15 minutes, 20 minutes late or whatever. He's a total dick. And she eventually can't keep up the bet with Bond, so he tries to bet his car, and the dealer's like, table stakes, sir. He's like, and Bond's like, no, let him try and win his money back. It's okay. So he holds up the keychain. He's like, this is my car. And he throws it on there, and he's like, let's play. So they play, but Bond wins the hand anyway, and he's collecting the money, and then he's like, oh, I'll need the valet ticket. And then he just gives him this dirty look and hands him the valet ticket. And as Bond's leaving, the DB5 is pulled up. Wonderful car. And Solange is about to get in, and then she sees Bond there, and she's like, oh, no wonder he was in such a bad mood. Which, no, it's not, because he hadn't lost the car at the time that he was scolding her. So, no, it's not that. It's just that he's a dick. And so she's going to leave, and he's like, oh, let's stay. Let's have a drink or something. She's kind of nervous, not sure if she should trust him or not. She's like, one drink. He's like, yeah, of course. So they get in the car, and then he does this great loop spinning around the main courtyard back to the valet. He's like, this is my home. And she laughs. And meanwhile, we cut to Le Chiffre, and he makes a call to his banker. And he tells his banker to pull all these bets against Skyfleet stock. And he's like, sir, nobody expects this stock to go anywhere but up. And he's like, just do it. He's like, okay. So meanwhile, Bond is romancing Solange at this great bungalow. And she's talking to him, and she's like, oh, she gets a phone call, and she's like, he's like, does the name Ellipsis mean anything to you? And she's like, no, but oh, that on the phone was my husband Demetrios. She's like, where's he going? And she's like, oh, he's apparently on the last plane to Miami, which means you have all night to question me. And it's funny because he takes the information to heart, and then he gets up and he's like, he makes a phone call for more champagne and caviar. And he's like, no, for one. And I love that, because if this were Roger Moore or Timothy Dalton, they'd be like, okay, maybe I'll take the 8 a.m. flight the next day to Miami. But no, Bond is like, nope, I'm ditching her right now. And it's like, geez, even after he said they'd spend the whole night, she was excited about it. And I love the cinematography and the lighting with the ocean right out the window. So beautiful.
See,
and,
okay, one second.
Yeah.
So when, and I know, and again, I'm just calling back to Timothy Dalton, but at the beginning of Living Daylights, when he's like, tell them I'll be back in an hour, and the lady's on the boat, and it better make it 2. I really loved that Bondness, but I did like this as well, because they're basically doing it.
Well, yeah, this is like really callous, and he could stay and go all the way, but he's like, nah, I'm going to go finish the mission, which is fantastic. And he just takes off, speeds, and they have this weird cut where he speeds away from the hotel in the DB5.
Mm-hmm.
And they cut to him in the back of a cab in Miami, but he's and it's like, okay, so he goes to Miami. They go to this museum art installation place where the key is put, where Demetrios puts the keys down on this key down on the table, and it ends up getting swiped by the next guy before Bond can see who it was. So he confronts Demetrios in the main hall, and they get in like the whole knife fight where they're slowly turning the knife in each other's hands. They're not saying anything, and Bond eventually knifes the guy, sets him down in the chair, taps his cheek, and walks away, like having fun with that. And he gets outside, and he sees the guy he's chasing, and he races off. He races over to Miami International Airport at this point, tries to play it cool in the gift section. And then the guy spots him, sort of blows his cover. He takes off. He loses him in the crowd. He calls Valiers, and he's like, I need to talk to M. She's like, she's not available. Can I talk? He's like, you tell her I'm at Miami International Airport, and I think a bomb's going to go off. You do it now. And he's like, can I put you on hold? And I thought that was really funny, despite the urgency of it. And he's like, I thought you might. So he stands there and waits. But when M gets on the phone, she's like, what, Bond, what the hell are you doing? And he's like, wait. And he got this idea. And he's like, I'll call you back. And he hangs up on her. And she's like, what the hell? And he checks the phone, and he sees ellipsis, and he uses that as the password to get into the security door, where the man is already the man he's pursuing, the go-between, has already gotten the bag, because the key that was placed on the table was for a bag that was placed at the check-in, and the bag has the security outfit with the security with the key card. And so he's now taking off onto the tarmac. He pulls the sirens for the fire alarms to activate all the sprinklers. And then M finally calls him back saying, where you are? He's like, I gotta go. And he calls the guy on his cell phone, and he answers, and that's how he sees him out in the lot. And so he follows him through the airport and eventually out on the tarmac, and this gets into a big epic chase where the guy steals one of the tanker trucks. Bond chases him, and he tries to shake him off, and they crash into other airport vehicles and such. And at one point, an airplane's about to land, and it has to abort the landing real quick because the vehicles are passing by in the chase, and then the force from the jet engines blows the cop cars out of the way that are pursuing them.
I fucking love that.
That was great. And then as the cops catch up, they get their machine guns out to shoot out the tires of the fuel truck, bringing it eventually to a stop. At one point, Bond gets into the cab and starts fighting the guy up to close, and we see that he actually grabs his belt real quick. And so when they get to the end of the chase where Bond throws himself out of the car, tumbling, he throws the terrorist out of the car tumbling. Well, he swerves the truck to a dead halt right in front of the Skyfleet plane that was being wheeled out. And he gets out of the car to get down, and then immediately the security knocks him down. And you have guys with big shotguns aimed right at him as they're tying him up, and they're taking him to the cop car, slamming him down. And just as the terrorist smiles and he like smirks and hits his cell phone to activate it, and he hears the button beeping, and that's where you have Bond like smirking as the terrorist realizes the bomb is now attached to his belt. He blows up, dies. We then cut to the next morning. Yeah.
I like the subdued nature of the explosion. It's not a loud explosion. You don't see it. It's basically just like a poof.
Right, because it was going to be counting on the fuel truck to do all the work.
Exactly. And I thought that was a great moment. Then you get to see the smile on the sadistic Daniel Craig being like, I won.
Yeah.
And again, it's a moment of James Bond having fun being James Bond. So when people say that Daniel Craig's James Bond is joyless, I would recommend going back and watching Casino Royale again.
Yes. So then we cut to the next morning, and Lashif's on the phone with his banker. He's like, yeah, I'm not sure how much you've lost. And he's like, 100.4 million or whatever the number is exactly. He's like, he lost a bunch, and he hangs up on him, and he's like, someone talked. So then Bond shows up back in the Bahamas, where he finds Solange murdered, having been tortured and tangled up in the hammock. And M's just like, Valerius is there too, and he kind of turns away, and he's getting sick, whereas M's like kind of smug. She's like, quite the body count you're racking up. And she's like, she was tortured first. Since you killed her husband, there's no one else left to question. And he's all upset about it. And she marches him out over into this kind of courtyard where they give him the tracking device. And she's got this little arrogant kind of smug on her face smug look on her face when they're looking. He's like, what, to keep an eye on me? And she's like, yes. And she's like, when 9/11 happened, the next day somebody bet against all the airlines, and when the airlines hit bottom on their stocks hit bottom on 9/12, someone made a fortune. And she hints that they think it was Lashif, but they're not positive. And she's like, well, it might maybe Lashif. He lost a ton of money. He doesn't have $100 million to lose, which is as he did on the Skyfleet bet, which is explains why he has arranged a high stakes poker game at the Casino Royale in Montenegro. And he's like, okay, do you want a clean kill? And she's like, no, he hasn't got the money to lose, and he's more valuable alive than dead. And Bond's like, okay. So she sends him to Montenegro, and we cut to Bond on the train to Montenegro, and this is where he meets Vesper Lind from the Treasury. And when he sees her name on her card, he's like, oh, Vesper, I do hope you gave your parents hell for that, because her name, Vesper Lind, is a play on West Berlin. Ha ha.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's why her name's Vesper Lind. It's Fleming being cheeky because it's like West Berlin, and that had a lot to do with it. So West Berlin, like that. Yes. So that's why Bond. That's why he insults the name of Vesper, because he sees her first and last name. So then they size each other up, and she sizes him up as an orphan, and he sizes her up that way too, and says, you're beautiful, and too many people are probably going to think you're an idiot, but you're overcompensating by dressing a bit more masculine than your peers. And they just go back and forth, sniping at each other, really liking it. And she's like, well, I'm the money. And he's like, oh, every penny of it. And she's like, well, and he's talking about how the plan is going to go, and it's going to work. She's like, oh, so there is a plan. I was under the impression that we were just risking millions of dollars and lives on a game of luck. And he's like, it's
not luck. You play the man.
Yeah. And so from there, they continue going to the casino. There's actually a deleted scene where they're on their way walking to the hotel, which was shortened. Where they're walking from the train station to the car that they get in, where they had some more of a fun back and forth. And in the back of the car, he jokes with her some more, saying, "Oh, my name's apparently James Beach, and you're Mr. Pan." What was the name he said?
Something Hot Pants, I think. Not Hot Pants.
No, it was
Broadchest.
Broadchest, Stephanie Broadchest. That's it. He's like, and you're Miss Stephanie Broadchest. He's like, I am not. And he's like, yes, you are. He's like, you don't have to trust me on this. So they get to the hotel. He checks in, and he says, and he immediately says, James Bond, the reservation's under beach. And she gives him a look. And she's like, why would you do that? He's like, look, I already, whoever this Lashif guy is, he already knows I'm here and that I'm the one who sabotaged it and sabotaged his Skyfleet thing because he knows that, Solange got tortured and gave up that information. So he's like, whatever it was, the fact that he decided to play me anyway, that tells me something about him. And she's just think, oh, you're just arrogant. This is your ego, which is their version of doing the whole Bond getting his cover blown in the book. Instead of having it be other people at the hotel or from some silly trying to get assassinated with a bomb, it's because of the Skyfleet thing. And he's like, no, Solange talked, so there's no point in hiding behind this. So she gets in the elevator first. She's like, no, you better take the next one. There's not enough room in here for you and your ego. And I got to say, I love this hotel. It's a real place. You can go there in Karlovy in Prague. It is beautiful. You can even get his room. It's great. I love this place.
Do you know how much it is?
I don't think it's too insanely expensive, though.
That's cool, then.
And there's a film festival they do there each year, which is cool, too.
Huh.
Very wonderful location, though. And so they go up to the room, and they go out to lunch where they meet Mathis for the first time, and he's talking about how he's going to help him. And, oh, yeah, the police chief, he could be a problem, but don't worry. And then he has him effortlessly arrested. He's like, the more wonders of Photoshop. We're going to have fun, Mr. Bond. And so we then cut to that night where Bond goes into you have to go through the main casino, which has all of this mahogany on the wall and all these players and everything and all the tables. And you go down to the side separate hall and have to check your ID with the bouncer or whatever. And then you go into this very beautiful, smaller casino room, which has a table on an elevated playing table in the middle with actual gold, the gold colored, the brass railings around the side for people to watch with a bar at the back and some tables on the side. And Lashif immediately sees Bond and goes to shake his hand. He's like, oh, is that Mr. Beach or is that Mr. Bond? I'm confused. And Bond's like, oh, we wouldn't want that, would we? But he goes to sit down anyway, and they talk about the rules of the game, and it's a Texas Hold'em poker. We have, once again, the woman who was playing Lashif on his yacht in the Bahamas is also here. She's also played Miss Ling in the opening sequence of You Only Live Twice.
Yeah.
So they brought her back, which was fun. You also have Aid there is another one of the players, and you have Felix Slider, who we don't know is Felix yet, but we see him there, Jeffrey Wright. And then the differences with Texas Hold'em and the way this game is played is that they have the banker call out every play so that people who don't know how to play cards know what's going on, which normally wouldn't happen.
Well, and this is the part of the movie where it does become a little bit of a tutorial for everyone who hasn't seen or understand poker, which is understandable at the time. It was blowing up, but this is sort of poker for dummies, the scene.
Yeah, it is, and I've watched like actual poker experts do reactions to this, and they say that every card they play in this movie is the only play they could have reasonably made. Like they really dumbed it down and made it simple for the audience. It's not even a challenge that what's going on, but I don't know enough about it. I learned how to play poker once, like 12 years ago. I won my first poker hand on a royal flush, and then got cleaned out the rest of the night. That's all I remember. And so they play the first few rounds. They take a break for an hour, which is interesting. That's going to be like an hour-long break. And Lashif has to go back to his room because he's been summoned there by his girlfriend. He's like, what's so damn important? She immediately kisses him and says, I'm sorry. And you have a pretty good jump scare where Obano just comes out of nowhere and starts strangling Lashif, and his other henchman grabs Lashif's girlfriend, and they start seizing them and attacking them. He's like, I would kill you. I would take a hand for this. He's like, where's my money? He's like, your money's safe. He's like, I would take a hand for this, but you need it to play cards. So he's like, hold out your hand, sweet one. She holds out. They force her arm open, and she screams, and that's where Bond and Vesper hear them as they're heading back to their room. And he says, go to the elevator, go. And she's not able to get in time as he's about to go in to see what's going on. But before that, the scuffle in the Chief's room ends because turns out that Obano was just bluffing. He's not going to cut her arm off, but he makes the notion that not a word of protest. You should probably find a new boyfriend, which is great. And once Bond investigates the doors opening, he decides to pretend to kiss her instead to try and hide them. But he sees Bond's earpiece, which I thought was funny because it's like beforehand, it's like, don't touch your ear, but he sees his earpiece anyway. And the henchman pulls a gun to run, just starts charging at him. And then Obano, it just seems so absurd that he's pulling out this huge machete in the hallway of this Hotel Splendide. And they run into the stairwell, and this begins the big stairwell fight where Bond effortlessly flips the first guy over the railing, and you see him fall down and hit the floor, and then Bond and Obano just go at it down the stairs with a machete and smashing the glass, and Vesper running down trying to open all the doors, and eventually he drops the machete and it flips down the stairwell right past Vesper's face, and there's a few odd instances where they go slow motion in this fight scene for some reason. I was like, okay, that was a little weird. And I'm told that this is actually where you have the extended bit for the unrated cut. The Blu-ray set, the 4K set I have said it includes the unrated cut, but it didn't prompt me to play the unrated one either or, so maybe it was, maybe it wasn't, I don't know. But at the end of the bottom of the stairwell, Bond eventually puts the guy in a chokehold and kills him. And he starts dragging the bodies into a utility closet there and says, go find Mathis and tell him where I've hid the bodies. Go, go! And so they go to do that. He returns to sit down to play. Or before he returns to sit down to play, he goes back to his room and takes his bloody shirt off and he cleans himself up. And then he goes back to the table, and Lashif being a total bitch. And I love this. He's like, you changed your shirt, Mr. Bond. I would hope our game isn't causing you to perspire. And I'm like, you motherfucker. It's like, this guy just saved you a lot of trouble by killing this guy who you don't want to have him breathing down your neck the rest of the card game. And you're just going to be like a total dick about it. And then you just hear the dealer say, ladies and gentlemen, if you're ready, we will now resume the game. We then cut straight to Bond showing back up in the room, and he sees that a wine glass has been broken with the spilled wine, and he's troubled, and he goes into the bathroom and sees that Vesper is sitting there all curled up with her dress is still on and the shower's on, and he goes to sit down with her, and he turns off the water. She's like, I've washed off the blood, but it still feels like it's there. So she's like really traumatized, and she's in the story, she's supposed to be 23. The actress is 25 at the time they filmed this, so yeah, she sells it, so she is really fragile, a bit more invulnerable. So he sits there with her for a while, and eventually they go back to playing that's the end of the card game for the night. And the next morning, Bond is on the balcony with Mathis, and they're looking down at one of Lashif's guys in the parking lot, and he's like, watch this. And Mathis gets out his phone and makes a phone call, and the security guards enter the parking lot, and they check the trunk of the guy's car because Mathis was able to pop it open.
Oh yeah.
And I love how Mathis is just able to do that effortlessly. And you see the bodies in there, and it's like the guy, and they immediately arrest the henchman, and Mathis just laughs like, I love how he's just enjoying himself doing this. And he's like, how's our girl? And Bond just kind of doesn't really answer him. But this is kind of at the moments where I would wonder that if you're going to so effortlessly like frame the police chief and frame the chief's bodyguards for these murders and stuff, it's like, why don't you just grab Lashif and like abduct him at this point? Like, what's stopping you from doing this? Like grab him in a stairwell or something. Then instead of entertaining the card game, but it's like, okay, so they go back to playing cards, and this time Bond loses because he had noticed that Lashif had a tell, which he had told Vesper about, and Vesper had told Mathis at the bar, and so he loses his next hand, and everybody clears out at the table. He just feels totally sullen, and he goes out to apologize to Vesper. She's like, oh, I can't give you the next buy-in, James. He's like, sorry. He's like, try putting that in a sentence. Like, sorry, Lashif's going to win and continue financing terrorism and killing innocent people. She's like, you lost because of your ego and nothing else, and blah, blah, blah. And it seems like such a bitchy move for her, because on the first viewing, you don't know that if you haven't read the book, you don't know that she's a traitor yet. So it's like, really, after what happened last night with you and him and the shot and all that, and now you're just going to sell him out like that? And it's like, oh, okay. Then you're going to find out later. So Bond decides she's not going to buy him back in. So he decides, I'm done with this. And he sees Lashif and his girlfriend in the casino. And it's really funny that, Lashif.
She's fine.
Yeah. And it's like Obano said, you should find a new boyfriend. And she's just totally uncaring about it, just hanging out with him. And they're all smiling and having a great time. And Bond asks for a vodka martini at the bar. And he's like, shaking his shirt. It's like, does I look like I give a damn? And instead, when he sees Lashif, he gets so triggered that even before he gets the martini, he just grabs a knife off the table and starts heading after Lashif. But Felix stops him in the stairwell. He's like, hey, I figured I'd stop you, brother, seeing as we're related. I think you should head off. I think you have him. And he's like, sorry, I don't. Excuse me. He's like, you're not buying back in? And he's like, no. He's like, look, man, I'm bleeding chips. Why don't you buy in? And you just let us keep. I'll let you keep the money. If you can buy us back in, I'll buy you in if you let us keep Lashif. And he's like, what about the money? He's like, we're the CIA. Does it look like we need the money? To which I've intended to always say, well, if you're the best poker player they can find, well, then maybe they do. Because he's been bleeding. Maybe they do. And I did forget to mention that there was the bit where Bond and Vesper, when they first arrived in their room, she managed to size him up and already have his suit laid out for him because it was tailored.
Tailored tuxedo. Yeah.
So he goes back to play the card game with them again, and they're sitting down there, and Vesper's clearly shocked that he's at the game because she didn't give him the extra money, wondering what's going on. And the chief notices that, and so then his girlfriend spikes a drink, and you just notice you see her like putting something in there. She just turns around and gives this look with the hair hanging down over one of her eyes, which is just great. And as they bring the drink to the table, Bond just takes a sip of that martini, the same one that he had already ordered at the first game. Because that's the thing, he gave the order for the Vesper, which he hadn't come up with yet, and everybody else got excited and wanted one too.
Oh, what is it? Okay, so it's 2 measures of vodka, a measure of gin, a half measure of Kino Lillet, shaken over ice with a lemon peel.
Yes, and everybody was impressed by that. And she's like, "Is that done? Everybody ready to get back to poker now?" It's like he said in their first round. And so he's used to just ordering this drink, and so Bond takes a sip. And they have this great shot of Lashif just sitting there with these dead eyes, just looking at him. Blank.
And again, Mads Mikkelsen being so intimidating in that scene, that was the moment where it was just like, I will fucking kill you.
Yeah, it's just, Jesus. And then Bond realizes it pretty quick. He looks at the drink, he looks back at Lashif, who just kind of looks at him, and then he just gets up to leave. And I love how, he goes into the bathroom, and they do this neat thing with the camera where they kind of change the color grade a little bit and extreme close-ups and shaking, so you're feeling like disoriented like he is, and he takes a drink and smashes it into the sink, and he's freaking out, and he ends up going out to the parking lot to get to his car because they did bring him an Aston Martin here. Yes. And he's stumbling in the parking lot or stumbling across the street and nearly getting run over by cars, but nobody's stopping to help him, which I thought was funny. Eventually, I've
been there.
Like nearly getting run over by a car at full speed.
Well, just because everyone thought I was drunk, let him go. Let him go.
He stumbles back into his car and he's trying. He activates the tracking device in his wrist, and Valiers comes to tell tell M that Bond's been poisoned. They're giving him instructions on what to do, and he starts doing it and putting on the pad for the mobile defibrillator, and he's unable to get it going because he forgot to plug in the power button. And Vesper, who Lashif's guards did not stop, just rushes out here because she's clearly aloof to the fact that they would kill him because she is a bit naive still to some of this. And
can I stop just to tell a personal story for 1 second?
Yes, you can.
I was playing on my phone today and I was trying to turn up and down the volume, but I guess I did a combination of button presses. My phone has an emergency SOS.
Really?
That if you do not deactivate it within 10 seconds, it will automatically call 911. So for 6 seconds, I was panicking, being like, don't call 911. Anyway.
That's crazy.
Yeah, but it's a security feature that I didn't know that I had on my cell phone. And I'm just like, I'm glad that's there. I wish I knew how to work it now. But and then I watched Casino Royale and I was like, please continue.
So she saves him, and they're like, and he says thank you to Vesper, but the guy on the phone thinks he's talking about him. He's like, you're welcome. And he's like, now get yourself off to a hospital. And Bond's and she's like, where are you going? He's like, I'm gonna go. Sure, I'll do that after I go win this game. She's like, you're not going back in there, are you? He's like, I wouldn't dream of it. And then of course he stumbles right back in. And I love also the look that Felix gave when Bond first left the table because he didn't know that he was poisoned. And he was kind of like, really? I staked you in the game and you're just giving up this easily. And so when he comes back to sit down and Lashif is just kind of like, what? And Bond's like, sorry, that last hand nearly killed me. And Lashif is just like really just kind of upset. And he's like, we will continue the game. And so they continue playing and Bond, the stakes get really high. And eventually Lashif and Bond are the only 2 players left. And Bond goes all in 40 million. And Lashif is kind of incredulous at this. And he looks at his cards, an ace and a 6, where the cards on the table are an ace and 8 and 7. And he's like, well, I think I'm going to call you on that one. And he throws in all of his chips to match the bet. And then Bond flips his card. And then his card's ace and 6. The dealer's like aces full of 6s. And so they're looking at that at the table. And then Bond finds his cards around and he flips it. It's a 5 and a 7. So he's like, oh, a straight line flush. And then the look on the chief, again, Mads Mikkelsen is so good at this. He just goes so tense and losing it and blowing his lid without like expressing it too much, but you could totally see it. And then his eyes even just start bulging, and then it just starts bleeding out of the one side, and he just gets up to leave immediately. And I forgot to mention the reason Bond was able to find Le Chiffre's room earlier is because they snuck a tracker on his inhaler that he uses,
Right.
which is a carryover from the book that he does have the inhaler. And so he gets up to leave, and they goes down to the restaurant, and it's really late, like super early in the morning again, because it's supposed to be like 3 or 4 because they play these games really late. And he sits down having dinner with Vesper, and they're kind of celebrating, and she eventually lies and says she has to, and he comes up with the idea to give the drink the name Vesper. And she's like, why? Because it has a horrible aftertaste? He's like, no, because you love every minute that you're with it, type of thing. And she's like, I love it that you've had it. And in the book, he actually comes up with the name almost upon meeting her for the first time, because he describes the drink in like the first chapter. But then when he meets her, he's like, "Oh, can I call it the Vesper?" And so she gets up to leave, saying she has to deal with Mathis of some things. He takes a couple more drinks. He's like, "Mathis," and he puts it together because he hasn't figured out who sold him out on the bluff yet. And so he runs outside, sees Vesper getting kidnapped in a car. He takes off into his Aston Martin, speeds off down the road. And you have this great chase through the countryside, which ends with him seeing Vesper tied up in the street. He veers to avoid her, and they set a Guinness World Record flipping this car, like I think 8 full rotations or something it was, 8 or 9 or something, maybe more. And it was
at the time of filming, it was the most times that a car had flipped on screen in a major motion picture.
Yeah, so they anticipated that they were going to set that record, so they made sure they had somebody from Guinness there to record it. And Bond is hauled out of the wreckage, and Le Chiffre's bodyguards immediately get a knife and pull the tracker out of his wrist. And then Le Chiffre's like, it seems your friend Mathis is actually my friend Mathis. Dirty little lie, but a good one. So they throw Bond in the back of the car with Vesper, and unlike in the book where they go to Le Chiffre's penthouse that he's rented down the coast, or down the road, and to the candlelit fire by the fireplace, they instead go to down to the dock at this old ship, and they go into the main cargo hold with barely some light in there, and they lock Vesper in a separate room. She's screaming. They strip off Bond's clothes. They sit him in the wicker chair and without the seat in it, and Le Chiffre is saying, wow, you've taken really good care of your body. Such a waste. And he's like, Miss Lind will give me the password if she hasn't already, and then you are going to give me the account number. Otherwise, there'll be little left to identify you as a man. Or no, Miss Lind will give me the account number. You're going to be the password. So he starts beating him with. In the book, it's a carpet beater. In this, it's actually just a heavy knotted rope that you'd find on a ship.
Mm-hmm.
And so he keeps beating him, and Bond ends up developing a sense of humor about it, saying, "No, you missed a spot. To the right. To the right." And Le Chiffre, I love, is laughing at this. Like, you are a funny man, Mr. Bond. It keeps hitting him again. At one point, he keeps asking, are you going to yield? Because if you don't, there'll be little left to identify you as a man. So if the question is, will you yield in time? A line taken straight out of the book, by the way, which is great. But then Bond eventually starts laughing some more and says, the whole world's going to know that you died scratching my balls. He's like, I died? And he's like, yes, because no matter what you do, I'm not going to give you the password, and your little friends are going to hunt you down and cut you into mincemeat. And he's like, no, oh, really? You are so wrong. And he finally gets angry. He's like, even after I slaughtered you and your little girlfriend, your people will still welcome me with open arms because they need what I know. And Bond just kind of reluctantly acknowledges it. Big picture. He's like, yeah, big picture. And she screams again. And he realizes that Bond's not going to give him the password. He's like, after he beats him a few more times, he's like, you're really not going to give me the password, are you? And he's like, no. He's like, okay, then. So he kicks him over in his chair, and he gets a knife. And he's like, well, then I feed you what you seem not to value. And then as he's going in, you hear the gunshots. And the chief is like, huh? And I remember the first time seeing this, having not read the book at the time and not knowing how the hell is Bond going to get out of this. And I hear the gunshots. I'm like, oh, Dos Ex Machina. And then this guy stumbles in there, and it's like, oh, it's Mr. White. I recognize him from the beginning of the movie. But then the fear on the chief's face and his eyes, and he's like, I can get the money. I almost had the money. He's like, money's not as invaluable to us, our organization is knowing who to trust with it. And he just shoots him in the head, and he just falls over dead. And I admittedly thought that was very anticlimactic. Even to this day, it's always a bit of a buzzkill that's how Le Chiffre goes out, considering how good he was. Mads Mikkelsen was playing the role.
Yeah, but I always, I didn't understand who Mr. White was at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
And when he showed up again, I did, as I do, get excited for the next movie while I'm watching the one that I'm watching. And every James Bond movie ends with James Bond will return, which I adore. But with that, I was like, oh, this is something bigger. Is it Spectre?
Mm.
And eventually, but I was so happy with that. And this is where, all right, we're done with Lashif. Like, we're done with Lashif. Everything is already taken care of. We're good. Story over. How much longer is this movie?
Right, because I hadn't realized at the time that I mean, he wants the account and the password, but I guess I didn't think about the fact, why is Mr. White not trying to get the answers out of Bond as well? Like, yes, he says money's not as important, but true. But if you can get it, you might as well get it. You know, I didn't really question why we go from Lashif getting shot dead to Bond waking up in the hospital. And they did that kind of cleverly, where they immediately get you to worry about Mathis. Like, oh, Mathis, and he's all worried about it, and his vision is all blurry and everything. And then he wakes up and he's at the that great retreat at Lake Como, which doubled as Padme's retreat on Naboo in Attack of the Clones. Actually, beautiful location. And Bond's sitting there in the chair, and Mathis is talking to him, and he's like, "Did you figured it out yet?" And he's like, "Figured out what? You know, why they let you live?" And he's like, "I don't know. He was killed, right? You described the man." He's like, and I love the camera close up on Mathis, where he's like, "Did they get a look at the killer?" Because his back is to Bond, and he's just like, "Did we get a look at him?" And he's kind of sitting there, and it's like, well, on the one hand, I know when he says that he's not referring to himself, but you're just thinking that, ooh, he might be the villain after all. And he's like, well, anything else you can remember that can help us? And Bond's like, help us or help you? He's like, huh? And he looks around, and then he gets tasered by these two guards coming up behind him. When he looked at Bond, like, what are you doing? You know? And they taser him and drag him off. And I love how there's somebody else sitting in a wheelchair watching this and has like no reaction to it. That he just gets tasered and taken away. And then we cut to some time later, and Vesper is sitting with him along outside the main building there, and she's all breaking down and crying, and like, oh, James, if there was nothing left of you but your smile, I would still love you with everything except for a little pinky finger. And Bond is like flirting with her, and his first viewing it seemed kind of cheesy because, again, I didn't realize she was in love with somebody else and it was a double agent. When you watch it the second time, it's like, oh, okay, this makes more sense. Because watching it the first time, it was a bit. It's like it felt like they were layering on the cheese factor a bit. And so along comes the rather jovial guy. I forgot to mention the guy who holds the money.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember this guy. I always forget this guy's name. He's great. You know, he just runs up there and he's like,
he is great.
He's Mr. That's right. He's not listed on the main cast list, but he's fantastic. And he's joking around. He's like, wow, you have everything. He's like, did you bring chocolates with you too? And he's like, oh, unfortunately not. And he starts laughing. Very effeminate, very funny.
Well, and also the reaction from Daniel Craig is just like, he's like, who is this guy and why?
Yeah. It feels more like a Daniel Craig reaction than it does a Bond reaction. Like, what? It's like, this guy's just kind of funny. And he's like, okay, the account number, Mr. Lind. And she punches in the number. He's like, oh, the password. Bond looks at her. He's like, you can do that. She's like, well, I would if I could know the answer. He's like, sure, it's VES. And then she gives him a look, which to me suggested, like, she thinks it's kind of creepy that he picked her name from. I always thought that was a bit of a creep show. Like, I
never got that. I got that as a surprise from her and almost like a touching moment.
I got it as a surprise. She was a bit creepy.
Okay. I always thought it was, well, I guess it could be taken either way. I thought it was her being taken aback by how much affection Bond has for Vesper. And she was actually at that moment touched. Like he had named the drink after her, made the password after her. And when it is revealed that the password is her name, that's the moment where it was like, yeah, Vesper's in love with Bond.
Yeah.
It's almost like a Tracy moment.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm having a Snoopy emergency. Please continue.
All right. So then we cut from that scene, from him getting the money and walking away, to some time has passed, and him and Bond and Vesper make out inside his room. And then eventually from there, we cut to them going to Italy, and they're showing up in Venice, and they're having a good time, and they're checking in their hotel, and they're heading down a boat along the river, having a good time. And then you see Gettler, who's Adolf Gettler from the book, dressed all in white with a white straw hat on. It's all fedora, and he's got sunglasses, or he's got regular glasses, but one of them is tinted with a bit of an eye patch. And Vesper gives him this very slight look, but she tries to hide it, and Bond doesn't notice at first. And then when we get to the hotel, in the morning, Bond gets a phone call from M saying, "We have somebody from the Treasury Department here wondering if you're ever going to deposit the winnings." And he gets kind of annoyed because Vesper had just left in the morning because they were going to plan their whole vacation for a whole month before deciding what they were going to do, and he had already sent in his resignation letter to her. And he's like, "Funny, I thought you would have already received the deposit." She's like, "No, so you'll be doing that today then, yes?" He's like, "Yes." And he runs downstairs, and there's an alternate version of the scene where he goes straight to the desk to ask about the Gettler man because he had seen him in the hotel as well. But instead, he just goes out and starts pursuing her across the town because he called the banker again, and who told him that, "Oh yes, the funds are being withdrawn as we speak, Mr. Bond. Is there a problem, Mr. Bond?" And so he just goes in pursuit of her through the side streets, and eventually she hands the money over to Gettler in a briefcase. But Gettler spots Bond. He grabs her. Gettler grabs her, holds her by the throat. He's like, "Oh, kill her!" And Bond's like, "Allow me." But then he gets shot at before he can finish the job. So he shoots these two other henchmen out of his way as Gettler and Vesper flee into this condemned house, which has been one of the floating houses of Venice. There's some construction going on there because it's all dilapidated on the inside. It's got an elevator. Bond goes in and starts pursuing them for a fight, and almost immediately he shoots the inner tube, the inflatable inner tubes that are keeping the house afloat. The house slowly starts to sink, and other people are noticing it as it's falling apart. This is a really great set that they built for this, and you have a really great fight scene where Vesper traps herself in the elevator as the house is sinking and tilting a bit, and he's fighting Gettler and all these guys, and eventually he kills Gettler by shooting him through the eye with a nail gun, which I've always loved. Like, that was great. And he then goes over to Vesper as the elevator is sinking underwater, and he drops the keys, and she's trying to reach for it, and she had locked herself in. She doesn't want to talk to him, and she starts drowning, and she starts reconsidering her options of wanting to drown once she actually starts drowning for real. And then she's reaching out for him and screaming. But the fact that she had locked herself in there and preferred to die really upset Bond. He eventually uses his feet to like kick the cage door of the elevator open, pulls her out and lunges her up to the rooftop, which is now at surface level, and he tries to resuscitate her and he fails. And it's like in the course of the day, less than a day, he went from being retired, rich, and probably soon to be married to broke, unemployed, and his girl's dead. And it's like really a shock for him. And we see Mr. White is watching, and he has picked up the briefcase full of money and sadistically kind of smiles at him, like he's happy that this is how it turned out. Like, I get he's happy that he has the money, but to be that sadistically pleased that that's how Bond and Vesper turned out. And he goes to leave, and we cut to Bond sitting on a small gondola on the waters at Venice, and he's talking to M on the phone, and M's like, she had a boyfriend, and they were very much in love, and he got kidnapped by the organization behind Le Chiffre and blackmailed him, and she gave up the tell and all of that. And so I guess we should, when we're too busy watching our enemies, we forget to watch our friends. And she's like, I guess this clears Mathis. And Bond's like, no, it doesn't. We just proved she's guilty, not that he's innocent. It could have been a double blind. Keep sweating him. She's like, you don't trust anyone now, do you? And he's like, well, I guess you've learned your lesson, which is kind of a dick thing to say to him at that moment, but she does anyway. And she's like, well, you're going to be coming back then? And he's like, yes. And he's like, well, do you need some time? He's like, why do I need time for? The job is done. The bitch is dead. And it's like, okay, and it's like, don't you realize, Bond, that, because she's kind of miffed that he said that. She's like, well, don't you realize that the reason they let you live that night was because, she made a deal with them to give them the money in exchange for your life. She probably hoped they would let her live, but she probably knew she was going to her death delivering that money. And Bond kind of takes that into consideration, and he looks at her phone again, and he sees that there was a message left behind that says, for James, Mr. White, with a number. And we then have this great crossfade to the gates opening at this beautiful estate on the shoreline of Lake Como. Beautiful place. And Mr. White drives in his black sedan, and he parks. He gets out of the car, and he's just kind of enjoying taking everything in. And he gets a phone call, and he answers. He's like, who's this? He's like, Mr. White, huh? And he gets shot in the ankle, and that's where you first hear the semblance of the Bond music. Da-da! And then he goes, da-da-da-da. And the camera moves really far away as we're seeing Mr. White like crawl as he's crying and all that, trying to get back towards the house. And it's like, we figure Bond's got to be somewhere in the shadows. And as Mr. White is pulling himself up the really thin steps, Bond walks past him. And that's when White stops like crying and being in agony because he realizes he's in deep trouble. and he looks up and we see Bond dressed to the nines with the huge rifle, assault rifle, and looking at his phone. He's like, yeah. And then he looks down at him, and Mr. White just gives him this angry kind of look because he knows he's caught. And he's just like, the name's Bond. James Bond. And it just sinks into for the first time in the whole movie that he says that, and you get the theme music kicking in. And I love just how grounded the movie is, because it's much more a character-driven piece, much like we were talking about last night with Spider-Man 2. It's a movie that's very character-driven with some action thrown in on the side. And that you never miss Spider-Man when he's Peter Parker, because you love that so much. Likewise, I never miss the action in this movie because I'm so drawn to the way Craig plays James Bond.
Well, and it is like reverential and referential to the rest of the series without going into, as the common folk currently say, the member berries and whatnot. It is a standalone movie. If you're going to start a James Bond story at the first mission, this does it really well without hitting you over the head. And after coming off of Die Another Day, when it was nothing but like jetpacks and tow knives, and like it was all about what had come before. Now, that was the 50th anniversary movie, so I understand where they're coming from. But this is a kickoff to a new style of James Bond, and I like the updating of it. But it is very much character driven as to who James is, where he fits in the organization of MI6, but also setting up future adventures as well. And just like every other James Bond movie, thank heavens, James Bond will return.
Yeah, and it does that job of setting up his other cohorts like Mathis and Felix. And I always thought it was funny that you never do check in with Felix again after he says, the chief, he's all yours. He's like, much appreciated, brother. And then it's like, oh, I guess Felix really dropped the ball there, not keeping his eye on where the sheep is going. But
there is that. Yes, that is true.
Yeah, there's that, which I thought was always funny. But I just love this movie. It's just the whole aesthetic of it. It makes me want to sit down with a nice drink and just kind of watch it in a more luxurious type setting. But it does really transport you away to another world, and that's why it can kind of get away with having a thinner plot. And it is kind of one of those hybrid type films where you watch it the first time and it's like, what's going on with Vesper? And then when you realize at the end, it's like, oh, and then you go back and watch it again and it all kind of makes sense. And then the whole, why didn't I think about it before, in terms of like, oh yeah, that's right. Why did they let Bond go? I didn't think about that, because I had that same reaction a lot of people did. It's like, okay, the chief's dead. You got the money. This guy apparently doesn't care about the money because he says it's not as important as to our organization as knowing who to trust with it. So it's like, why is the story continuing? But I didn't mind that it was in a bit of a lug for a bit, because I just enjoyed, again, the whole aesthetic of it and the setting and the characters. I was invested. And so that just made him wondering where it was going to go, because I still, on my first viewing, was a bit of a sucker. I didn't think it was going to be Vesper, because I was like, well, I didn't think why Le Chiffre would lie, because it's not like he would use her for multiple jobs at that point. But it's like, oh, of course he lied,
Well, and maybe it's just one of those leftovers that everyone gets from any new Bond. Mm-hmm. Is this going to live up to the Bonds that we've known before? And this one does. Like, this is still like Daniel Craig with all the complaints in regards to a blonde Bond. I know that there are, and I've said it before, I'll say it again, there are people who think that once James Bond is played by a man who is younger than yourself, then you sort of lose touch with James Bond. I haven't had that happen yet. It'll probably be the next one. But this is still very much in the James Bond world. The music is great. The locations are fantastic. The action is good. There is a smugness that maybe isn't as playful as previous Bonds, but it's still Daniel Craig making James Bond his own.
Mm-hmm.
And it fits. Like, even if you take away any argument about continuity or whatever, this still fits within the world of James Bond.
For sure. I've never been one to get hung up on continuity issues in terms of Bond, because even the ones that do have continuity are a bit loose with it. So mm-hmm. I did I love this movie. It is it feels like the classiest, most high life version of Bond I've seen in any movie. Not just the character, but like all the places you go and the way you're feeling while you're there and stuff. Because again, that's the movie. Like I said, I feel like I want to sit down, have a nice drink, and enjoy like a Bond movie for the night. Like that's kind of the high class type thing that I feel with. Like when you go to the Bond website and you see all the super expensive apparel and stuff that they try and sell, and it's like that's kind of feels like something that'd be from this movie in particular. Like the other ones are mostly like adventure and fun movies, and some of them have meet the highs of looking all prestige and have their own levels of prestige as well. But Casino Royale is the one that feels most natural at it, and so great for it.
And I think it was something that the audiences at the time sort of needed, was to bring Bond closer to Earth, not right back down, but make him a little bit more relatable and have more foibles, be just an everyman who's being put into these situations. And while he's not an everyman, he's already an elite assassin at this point. I do like it as a first mission. I like it as a looking back, but also looking forward. So I don't remember what I gave it. I'm going to cautiously say that it was 9 bullets.
I'm going to firmly say I gave it 10 bullets.
I think I gave it 10, but I think I might have given it 9, because at this point in our previous reviews, we still had quite a bit of Bond to go through, and I was being conservative with my reviews, because I was like, I don't think we had done License to Kill yet. And
well, you can have more than 110 if you want. You understand that?
True. But if I said 10 before, I stick with my 10. And if I didn't say 10 before, I'd like to upgrade it to a 10. Because watching it again, especially considering that now, when we reviewed this last time, I don't remember the review, I was enthusiastic about it, but at that point, we were still anticipating No Time to Die.
Yes, we had reviewed the first 5 Connery films, conveniently enough, and then it just started that we reviewed this on September 15th, 2021. And as we were leading into No Time to Die.
Mm-hmm. And so this being the beginning, No Time to Die being the end of Daniel Craig's tenure, I appreciate this cycle of James Bond films.
Yeah, and I could also do the crazy headcanon thing where I could think of, doesn't matter how different the years are, or how the eras are separated and all that. Like Casino Royale is the first one. No Time to Die is the last one, no matter what.
Yeah.
Going forward. If they're still making Bond films 50 years from now, nope, it's still Casino Royale, still No Time to Die.
Yeah. And I agree with that wholeheartedly. And when we reviewed No Time to Die, and I don't know when I started saying it, but I really appreciate the fact that, spoilers for No Time to Die, when James Bond dies, and it says at the end of the movie, like when he died, I was like, there's only one thing that can redeem this. And it better be James Bond will return. And they did it.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, great. I am satisfied. It was, I think that Daniel Craig's tenure as James Bond was good. Not my favorite Bond, but certainly not my least.
No, my favorite is still Sean Connery in the Fab Four. I still have a really nostalgic soft spot for Pierce Brosnan just because he was my first Bond that I saw. Even though I do like, I mean, Pierce Brosnan, again, it's like what they call the milk chocolate Bond. And that's kind of the fun Bond. And that's what I like. And I think I rank Pierce Brosnan second to, or I should rank him second. I can't remember how I ranked them originally. I think I put Daniel Craig second to Sean Connery when we ranked them. And that's mostly because I think Craig had better movies. Casino Royale, No Time to Die, I think were much better. On those two, I thought were his 2 perfect films. Yeah, Skyfall I had my problems with, but it's still a really enjoyable movie to watch. Even Quantum of Solace, fun popcorn movie, even though it's a mess. Even Spectre has gorgeous cinematography worth looking at, even though it's a movie that's more interested in basking in its references than it is in being its own movie. And so
I will forgive a lot for Léa Seydoux.
Yeah, and Casino Royale, that's the table setter, and as we tipped our caps to the 70th anniversary of James Bond.
And here's to 70 more years.
Yes. And if 70 more years, and if we like, we might have another anniversary review coming up for shits and giggles if we'd like.
Well, what's going on? What's the plan, Stan?
May 8th is the 60th anniversary of the release of Dr. No in North America, US and Canada. And I recall that first video we did when we covered Dr. No was a bit sloppy as well. Probably my sloppiest recap that I never did because I forgot huge chunks of the film when we were talking about it.
But that was the first show that we did.
It was. And I thought that would be kind of funny because it's like, okay, I advertised this show tonight by saying, come join us on the only show where we could celebrate the 60th anniversary of something 6 months ago and now celebrate the 70th anniversary of that same thing 6 months later without it being crazy. It makes perfect sense to go from 60 to 70 in the span of 6 months.
Well,
another month.
I am more than willing. You know what? I think we should probably, if we're gonna do another review of Dr. No, I would love it if we could bring someone in, maybe Tony, get someone else to sort of open panel it, just so it's not like, obviously we're doing Casino Royale because last time I was a puddle.
Yeah.
Now, going through again, I would love to bring in more voices of other people who love James Bond as much as we do.
Yes, that could be great, and that would be fantastic. And then just talk about also how that film had its reverberations over the whole franchise, even up until the most recent film, even. So that could be fun. Is there anybody else in the chat before we?
There is stuff going on. Ploxord is being facetious, saying, I am very glad that Catherine reminded me that Bond is a fantasy series. The time period and product placement had me believing they are documentaries. Was this the one that had the Heineken ad?
I mean, I know he did Heineken ads for the new one, for the latest one. I don't remember if he did them back then.
Neither do I, but there is,
I think it's the second one, Quantum of Solace, where he has the Heineken at the bar with Felix.
Right. But they're like Sony Ericssons are the phones. The computers are Sony Vios. Remember Sony Vios? Like, there is a lot of product placement. Aston Martin. Heck, the cars are always a huge deal.
What was that?
The cars.
Oh, yeah. But I feel that the Aston Martin is more of a mainstay in the Craig era than any of the others. Of which I saw a brand new one driving down the freeway today. Orange.
Really? Well, hey, at least you can find it at the parking lot. Lemon Pie says, I don't need sexy ASMR. I want relaxing ASMR. And Lemon Pie, the only reason I highlighted this is if you're a fan of ASMR and if you're a fan of Star Trek, I recommend any of the Engine Room or Quarters ASMRs. You'll sleep like a baby. Lemon Pie says, Scotty is drinking coffee. That's possibly demonetizing. YouTube is against coffee. It stimulates independent thinking and hyperactivity. Well, if you'd like a coffee cup much like mine, the Fantasmagorium, if you go to the website, you can get one of your own. Also, I haven't been drinking coffee. I may not be wasted, but I'm certainly not, teetotaling.
On podcast.
I'm sorry?
You can't teetotal on a Bond podcast. And I should mention, it was also about 6 months ago or so that I had my first vodka martini. I had a clean one and a dirty one, and I did not like either of them. I thought they tasted horrible.
If you get a good vodka martini, like gin is the traditional, vodka is sort of an aberration. But if you get a good vodka martini, I really enjoy it, but sometimes it can be like drinking rubbing alcohol.
Yeah. Or gasoline.
Or gasoline, yeah.
It was just the second one, the dirty one, had a lot more olives in it, and it just tasted like regular olive juice with a bit of alcohol. It's like, ugh, this is nasty.
Yeah.
Which seems, I mean, kind of sacrilegious that it took until 2022 before, as a Bond fan, for me to have my first vodka martini. But it just it was.
The legal age for people to consume alcohol in Ontario is 19. And on my 19th birthday, the first drink that I ordered legally was a vodka martini shaken not stirred.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think the first thing I did when I was 21 wasn't so much the alcohol. I went to casino up in Tahoe. Went to the slot machines. It's fun.
Yeah, but what did you have?
Probably rum and Coke.
Makes sense.
Not
a
at the
Cuba Libre.
Yeah.
Lemon Pie says milk chocolate Bond goes right to the thighs. And Lemon Pie concludes with a dirty martini made well is good, but it is easy to mess one up, it seems. Yeah, you can get too much brine, and then yeah, it's too much. But I do enjoy a dirty martini, and I still stick with the olives. I don't go with the lemon peel. But yeah, so that is everyone in the chat. Thank you everyone for being here. Lemon Pie, of course, Ploxord, thank you. Edge of Time saying euphemisms, I assume. Adolf Gettler did nothing wrong. Sure, I don't even know who that guy is.
That's
Is that
the
like
guy who Vesper gives the money to?
Oh, I thought it was a euphemism. Okay, that's good. I'm glad I didn't get duped into like Dolph Lundgren. Thank you again to Matt G for being here and believing that I was drinking coffee. Thank you so much. And also our ever vigilant mod, anti-derivative Spartacus, who will be back to her regular 4D self shortly. She will be anti-derivative Jill once again, much like James Bond. Jill will return. Thank you, Captain Finity, for being here briefly, at least. Herc 130, thank you again. Appreciate it. And you are my favorite flyboy. And is there anyone else who was here? I'm sure there were. Thank you, lurkers, and thank you for everyone on the rerun. That is it. That is all. That is everything. Do you remember how we ended these shows?
I don't, but I just want to say that James Bond is probably my favorite IP. Because like it goes back to what you said, where when you don't get a deluge of material and you're made to wait for it, it just makes it extra special, even if it's an installment you don't even like that much. It still feels special. Because
yeah.
I admit I should read some of the newer novels. I've heard they're quite good. But yeah, I mean, 70 years, one of the coolest characters ever.
Influential, iconic, and reinvented for each generation. It's one of those characters that even the recasting defines the actor. The actor contributes to the role. And it's one of those, when it comes to intellectual properties, I know I'm never going to see the last James Bond movie. It will outlive me. It predated me. But I am happy to be on a planet that had James Bond. I'm glad I could share it, even though he is, fictional. And also to you, Kat, while we're celebrating anniversaries, as I mentioned, this was the first show in terms of our reviewing of intellectual properties. And yeah, the reason that we got into this is because of our shared passion for James Bond. And it's been a pleasure talking about all the things, but whenever we can get together and talk about James Bond, it is my favorite.
It is. And I realize now, after you mentioned that Bond predates you, as it does me, that I've been around for half of Bond's lifetime. 35 years for me, and then 70 for the franchise. So like that makes me feel old. But it's fantastic though.
And I can't wait. If we're revisiting Doctor No, that'll be fantastic. And I may not see the last one, but I am looking forward to reviewing the next one with you.
Yes, I can't wait for that. That is going to be something extra special when we finally get to see the new one.
Gun barrel. I just want a gun barrel.
Yep, classic gun barrel, please. Just do it.
Get us back to that, and then I will be happy as a clam.
Uh,
All right then. I don't remember how we used to get out of here. How do you want to get out of here? We can do whatever we want, really.
Yeah, just bring the stream back.
Oh, I know.
What?
Martinis, Gadgets, and Guns will return.